say silence, I mean partial silence, I suppose. All that noise. Let the doors be open quand on ouvre les portes. Or relative silence. It is my duty to inform the House that a vacancy has occurred in the representation in the House of Commons for the electoral district of Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner, in the province of Alberta, by reason of the passing of Jim Hillier.
Pursuant to subsection 28(1) of the Parliament of Canada Act, I have addressed a warrant to the Chief Electoral Officer for the issue of a writ for the election of a member to fill the vacancy.
Pursuant to Section 15.3 of the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons, it is my duty to lay upon the table the list of all sponsored travel by members for the year 2015 with a supplement as provided by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents. L'honorable Secrétaire parlementaire.
Honorable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under Standing Order 32.2 of this, I am honored to present in both official languages the annual report for 2014-15 of the Office of the Taxpayers Ombudsman.
Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents.
Du projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Mr. Garneau, appuyé par Madame.
Mr. Garneau, seconded by Madame Philpott, asks for permission to introduce an act entitled An Act to Amend the Air Canada Public Participation Act. The motion is deemed adopted. Mr. Garneau, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves that the bill be now read a first time and printed. The motion is deemed adopted.
Quand ce projet?
When shall the bill be read for the second time?
À la prochaine séance.
At the next sitting of the House.
Ms. Qualtrough for Mr. Baines, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Copyright Act, Access to Copyrighted Works or Other Subject Matter for Persons with Perceptual Disabilities. This motion is deemed adopted. Ms. Qualtrough for Mr. Baines, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted. When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Mr. Hare, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Canadian Forces Members and Veterans Reestablishment and Compensation Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts. This motion is deemed adopted. Mr. Hare, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted. When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations. The honourable member. Just a minute. Now I'm going to move on. The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 34.1, I have the honour to present to the House in both official languages the report of the Canadian delegation of the Canadian NATO Parliamentary Association respecting its participation at the spring session, Budapest, Hungary, 2015, May 15 to 18, 2015.
Presenting reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation de rapport de.
Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present in both official languages the first report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages entitled Tribute to the Honourable Mauril Bélanger. It was the motion by the member for Montmagny, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup, and the committee wishes to thank the Honourable Maurice Mélanger for all of his work on behalf of official languages in Canada. He was the former chair of the committee and played other roles to represent with dedication the members of his riding, but he worked very hard as well to support official language minority communities across Canada. We want to thank him for his perseverance, his courage, his determination, and despite the difficulties that he encounters daily, he still shows great dedication to his duties. He has made and continues to make a very important contribution to supporting the vitality of our official language communities from sea to sea to sea. And so we invite all minority official language communities to join with us to thank him for his exceptional contribution. Normally, I would like to remind members that a member of the House should not be named, but I think that we will make an exception in this case.
Presenting reports from committees, the honourable member for Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to table in both official languages the sixth report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is asking for the report to be deemed adopted, subject to Standing Order 9112, and on February 28th, we moved that the report be considered non-votable.
Du règlement.
Pursuant to Standing Order 9112, the report is deemed adopted.
Dépôt de projet de loi éminent.
Introduction of private members' bills.
Mr. Easter, seconded by Mr. Whalen, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Recognize Charlottetown as the Birthplace of Confederation. This motion is deemed adopted. The honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to table today a private member's bill entitled An Act to Recognize Charlottetown as the Birthplace of Confederation. I should note that this legislation was previously introduced by my colleague, the member for Charlottetown. The purpose of the legislation is to place in statute the recognition extended by proclamation of the government of the Right Honourable Jean Chrétien in September 1996, namely that Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, be recognized as the birthplace of Confederation. As we approach the 150th anniversary, Mr. Speaker, the 150th anniversary of Confederation in 2017, the legislation I am tabling today affirms a significant historical event in our nation's history and is a measure I believe all members in this House can support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not sure if I heard the Honourable Government House Leader suggest the member from Malpeque was actually at the conference, but I don't think that's what he said. The motion is deemed adopted. Motion is deemed adopted. When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Madame Moore.
Ms. Moore, seconded by Ms. Malcolmson, seeks leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Excise Tax Act, Baby Products. The motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you know, sales tax should be imposed on luxury products or those considered so. And unfortunately, This isn't always the case these days. There are products like frozen pizzas and others that are not subject to tax, but other products such as baby products and nursing products that are subject to tax, so with diapers and bottles and so on, that are used for feeding or looking after babies that are taxed, and I believe that they should not be, and that's why I've introduced this bill to remove the federal tax on these products. I think that the logic is clear. In Quebec, for example, there is already no provincial sales tax on these products, and I hope that the House will see fit to adopt this bill.
Madame Moore, appuyée.
Ms. Moore, seconded by Ms. Malcolmson, moves that the bill be now read a second time, or rather a first time and printed. The motion is deemed adopted.
Quand ce projet de loi
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Julian, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, Appeal Process for Temporary Resident Visa Applications. This motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very honoured to rise in the House with thanks to my seconder, the Honourable Member from New Westminster Burnaby, to introduce this very important bill. I come from Vancouver Kingsway, one of the most multicultural ridings in the country, where families have settled from all over the world, and they still have relatives that live all over the world and regularly invite their relatives to come for important family events like weddings, funerals, births, and just simply to visit. Now, of course, many of those visitors have to apply for a visitor's visa, a TRV, which all members of this House would be familiar with. And very often these visas are rejected, often incorrectly, always with very little or inadequate information. There is no appeal of that decision. This bill would provide applicants turned down with an appeal to the Immigration Appeal Division so that they could correct this in a timely manner instead of having to reapply for a new visa, which costs additional money, delays, and also causes prejudice to people as they continue to get rejected. They end up losing their chance of getting a visa. This bill would rectify that and give applicants a chance to correct injustice, and I hope that all members of this House support this bill.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Julian, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted. When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Julian, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act, Tax Credit for Dues Paid to Veterans Organizations. This motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think I speak for all members of this House when we say that we very much honour and cherish the veterans that have served our country. And of course, many of these veterans to this day are active members of veterans organizations like Legions, like Army, Air Force, and Navy clubs, and ex-servicemen's organizations. These are vital places for these men and women to gather. These organizations also play important roles in our community. They volunteer, they're community sponsors. Very often they're an important source of funds for children's athletic teams. Of course, these clubs are struggling. Members are aging, they have low income, and dues are low for these organizations, resulting in these nonprofit organizations struggling today. This bill would help by making dues paid to these organizations a refundable tax credit, which would allow the veterans organizations to raise their dues, get the necessary funds they need without harming the members who have to pay these dues on fixed incomes. So I would urge all members of this House to support this very vital and important bill.
Mr. Davies, appuyé par Mr.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Julian, moves that this bill be read first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
Reading of this bill.
Quand ce projet
When shall the bill be read a second time?
la prochaine.
At the next sitting of the House.
Okay. Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Massey, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Food and Drugs Act, Sugar Content Labeling. This motion is deemed adopted. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the health critic for the New Democratic Party, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this bill today, again with thanks to the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby for seconding, from Windsor West for seconding this. This bill, as stated, would amend the Food and Drugs Act to require that all prepackaged foods prominently display the sugar content on the front of the product. As all members would know, current nutritional guide box is on the back of the product, and it does not adequately indicate this important element. This bill would empower consumers to make healthier choices by providing them with better information. Now, the prepackaged foods filling grocery aisles across Canada these days have too much sugar in them. This is a major driver of the growing obesity rates among Canadians, particularly young Canadians. According to Stats Canada, 1 in 5 Canadians are now considered obese. The Public Health Agency of Canada states these rates have doubled since 1981, and of course excess weight causes a number of major health issues, including heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, certain types of cancer, and other serious illnesses. Mr. Speaker, more information means better choices. It means healthier Canadians. I hope all members will support me and vote in favour of this important bill.
Mr. Davies, seconded by Mr. Massey, Windsor West, moves that the bill. Première lecture de projet de loi d'intérêt.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Tiens.
Motions. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there have been consultations amongst the parties in the House, and I believe if you seek it, you should find unanimous consent for the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, immediately after routine proceedings concludes today, the order of business for the remainder of the sitting day shall be as follows: government orders until 11 a.m., statements by members from 11 a.m. to 11:15 a.m., oral questions from 11:15 to 12 o'clock noon, and government orders from 12 o'clock noon to 2:30 p.m., after which, Mr. Speaker, the House shall stand adjourned until Monday, April 11, 2016 at 11 a.m., pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1.
Does the Honourable Minister have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion?
Yes.
Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
Yes.
Carried. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member.
Presenting petitions.
Stoga.
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. This is still on motions, I understand. The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, if the House gives its consent, I move that the first report of the Standing Joint Committee on Scrutiny of Regulations presented in the House earlier this week be concurred in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the Honourable Member have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? No, apparently there is not unanimous consent. Maybe that can be worked out. We'll see what happens with that. All right. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to rise today to present two petitions. The first is with regard to genetically modified organisms. The people who signed this petition are concerned about GMOs and demand that the Government of Canada establish a system to identify GMOs for consumers.
Speaker speaks to the issue of the threat to pollinators across Canada, the impact on honeybees of insecticides based on nicotine, known as neonicotinoids, needs to be regulated. The petitioners ask this government to act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. Questions on the order paper? The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga on
Mr.
petitions.
Speaker, could I beg your indulgence to return to motions just for a minute?
We passed the rubric on motions. Is there unanimous consent of the House that we return to the rubric on motions? Agreed? Agreed. The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try again. If the House gives its consent, I move that the first report of the Standing Joint Committee on Scrutiny and Regulations, presented in the House earlier this week, be concurred in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga have the unanimous consent of the House to propose the motion? The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. And we're back to questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If questions number Q64 could be made an order for return, this return would be tabled immediately.
Is it the pleasure of the House that the aforementioned questions made orders for return and that they be tabled immediately? Yes? Yes? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Ordre du jour, orders of the day. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Just prior, Mr. Speaker, and finally, I would ask that the remaining questions be allowed to stand.
I'd say the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary was on his toes this morning, and it's just that I was not on the receiving end of that. So thank you very much. Is that agreed as well? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Now we'll go to orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day. Government orders, government bills, commons. Resuming debate at second reading of Bill C7, an act to amend the Public Service Labour Relations Act, the Public Service Labour Relations and Employment Board Act, and other acts, and to provide for certain other measures. Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this House today to debate Bill C7. First of all, I would like to underscore the wonderful work done by the RCMP. Often we forget about the work done in obscurity so that we can go about our daily lives safely throughout the country. Be it the men and women who work all year round on commercial fraud, drugs, investigations, but especially to provide our security. The Brussels attacks this week remind us brutally of how fragile our safety is and how privileged we are to have a competent police force on which we can count. I'm well aware of this because my father worked for the RCMP for 34 years. He was a sergeant in his section. So throughout my childhood and teenage years, I experienced his daily life. On many occasions, my father had to leave home for weeks, days at a time, and a few times for months at a time to provide security for Canadian citizens in various places. Every day we were worried about him, about his safety. My father was always loyal, even when he had his different tasks. His main concern was always the safety of those he worked with. It's thanks to my father that I'm here today and can express my views about this. My father made sure that we knew that women in politics was a well-established fact, and I wish to thank him very much. It's an honor for me to be able to talk about his work, his life, and of course the right to collective bargaining for all members of the RCMP. Not to mention, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Gaétan Delisle, a Labour representative for the Quebec RCMP, started this movement, this right to collective bargaining for members of the RCMP. Mr. Delisle had a lot of problems throughout his career because of this. He was suspended often because he wanted an association and the right to collective bargaining. Respecting the men and women in service is not just thanking them for their good work. They justifiably have rights that we must also respect. The right to collective bargaining is one that seems to me very important. I did myself table a bill to promote this right. The recognition of the right to negotiation by workers is critical, and this is true in all fields. I'm familiar with this because I worked in a union shop. I experienced negotiations and was concerned with occupational health and safety. In the NDP, we feel that members of the RCMP should have the same rights as all other police forces in Canada, that is, the right to collective bargaining. It seems obvious to me that members of the RCMP are entitled to the best standards when it comes to their occupational health and safety. We acknowledge that it's desirable for members of the RCMP to have a genuine collective bargaining process that's not limited exclusively to issues of pay and benefits. Quite often, one thinks that when you want an association, it's just for benefits, but it goes well beyond that. There are many things that could be discussed, and it is the members themselves that experience the work they do on a daily basis and that can bring about change, particularly when it comes to health and safety. The introduction of a collective bargaining system will have a positive impact on the implementation of better labor relations. It seems fair and equitable for all members of the RCMP who work with great dedication day and night to ensure the safety of everyone coast to coast. I'd like to echo what my colleagues pointed out in their speeches about certain exclusions in the bill that are very concerning to us in the NDP, that is harassment and health and safety. The Supreme Court stated, and rightly so, that the most important aspect of collective bargaining is the freedom given to employees to pursue the objectives they establish themselves in accordance with their own working environment. I think that it's timely to underscore part of the Supreme Court's response. On the one hand, it's difficult to understand why the exclusion of a group from the collective bargaining protected by law can ensure its neutrality, stability, or even its reliability. The exclusion of members of the RCMP from the collective bargaining process of the Federal Public Service seems to foster discontent and agitation rather than mitigate it. Moreover, and I am paraphrasing the Supreme Court, it has not been established that the authorization of a genuine collective bargaining process for members of the RCMP will perturb the stability of this police force or influence the public's perception of its neutrality. The government has produced no evidence that is convincing in this regard. Empirical research seems to indicate the contrary, as does the experience of provinces with unionized police forces. Mr. Speaker, there are cases where RCMP officers respond to calls alone in northern territories or in isolated places, and it's important to ensure their safety and health because they work in a dedicated way every day. It's high time that the employees who work in the field come to the table to negotiate as equals in order to settle this type of issue, because it's the employees themselves who can bring forth concrete solutions to help the police force do a better job. Giving them these rights respects the work that they have to do, but also recognizes the human beings behind the uniform. In uniform, police officers are heroes, but within those uniforms, there are human beings above all else. And we have to give them some consideration and give them the opportunity to negotiate and bring about changes for their own safety. With this bill, we have an opportunity to respect the spirit of what collective bargaining should be. We recognize the unique role that the RCMP plays as a national police force, while putting in perspective the rights of men and women in uniform and giving them the means to have their rights respected. This is why we feel that the bill should be considered in committee, where it can be examined in greater depth in order to bring about amendments and consider the members of the RCMP, the ones who do the actual work. In order to respect them, we should vote to approve second reading and proceed to committee consideration to study the bill. We hope and expect that the government will justify the specific exclusions in the bill. Otherwise, we will table amendments to improve the legislative measure and make sure that RCMP members obtain the right to collective bargaining in compliance with the spirit and letter of the law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Honourable Member for her speech and for her support for this very important bill, for her words of respect for the RCMP. And we will look forward to this debate to look at the issues and the mandate of this bill in committee. I'd like to ask the member what her thoughts are about the unique operational issues of this National Police Force and its members. What are the types of things that are unique about the work of the RCMP?
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. I can take the example of my father on a daily basis. He was responsible for investigations, for fraud, for drugs. So when they had to conduct investigations, they jeopardized or, in fact, were in danger. Their security and safety was in danger. It's also their job to keep us safe, and we can see what they're doing here on the Hill on a daily basis. They are exposed and in the more remote areas. They're the first responders. They're on the front line, and oftentimes they're alone. So that's important to take into account all of the types of work done by police officers, by the RCMP members, and also what they need to do to keep everything secure and safe. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleague had an opportunity to work in a unionized environment, so she has experience in that area, and she's seen the advantages or the benefits of negotiating a collective agreement, negotiating working agreements, and she said a few words about that, but I'd like her to summarize the importance, if you will, for the RCMP of being authorized to negotiate their workforce for people like her father or women, for example, who also work in the RCMP. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent question. As a president of a union, I had to do a lot of this type of work, and oftentimes people think that it's only about the social benefits and the salary, but there are many more aspects involved, Mr. Speaker. There can be different requirements, and we can improve the types of work done by women. And just think about the uniform, for example. There can be changes even at that level. So with respect to safety, yes, dealing with harassment, even though it's a police force, there may well be harassment within or on the outside of the organization. So Collective bargaining, a union enables police officers to speak to the issue and to make the necessary changes, concrete changes that they need. Because it's first and foremost important for workers. Now we have time for one final intervention, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Well, thank you again, Mr. Speaker. My colleague has just talked about harassment within the RCMP. There are certain exclusions, in fact, several exclusions in C7, and there's one with respect to disciplinary measures, deployments, etc. Does she think that those exclusions should be in C7, or should they be excluded as under the current bill? The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague. That's an excellent question, and it's a point. Those aspects regarding harassment should have been in the bill. It's very important, and that's part of a comprehensive package. The opportunity to study the bill at committee will give us hopefully an opportunity to make amendments and to include that. If, however, some of the provisions in the bill or that come up during negotiations aren't there, they can be defined, in fact, at committee. But we do need to ensure that public safety is first and foremost, and to ensure everyone that public safety is of the utmost importance, and that it's important to clarify certain things and to make those changes if necessary. Before going to the Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel, on resuming debate, I must inform her that I will be needing to interrupt the remarks at 11, and I will, as is customary, indicate when the time is almost up. So, the Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to address how Bill C7 would lead to a meaningful process of collective bargaining for RCMP members and reservists. As you know, this bill, if passed, would allow RCMP members and reservists to choose whether they wish to be represented by a bargaining agent independent of RCMP management. The key features of this bill include the requirement that the RCMP bargaining agent have as its primary mandate the representation of RCMP members, the exclusion of officers from representation, and the designation of the Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board as the administrative tribunal for matters related to the RCMP member bargaining unit, as well as grievances related to a collective agreement. This exclusion of officers, consistent with existing provisions in the Public Service Labor Relations Act that exclude public service executives from representation. The bill also provides for binding arbitration as the means to solve impasses in light of the essential nature of the work performed by the RCMP. As is standard in federal labor relations, the bill would require that to be certified as a bargaining agent, an employee organization would need the support of a majority of RCMP members in a single national bargaining unit. Mr. Speaker, the labor relations regime that this bill would create marks the beginning of a new era in the history of the RCMP. Allow me to take a few moments to explain the process by which this bill was developed. In the summer of 2015, the Treasury Board Secretariat engaged an independent consultant to survey regular members of the RCMP. The purpose of these consultations was to canvass RCMP regular members' views on potential elements of a labor relations framework that would allow them to choose their representatives and bargain collectively. The process consisted of a survey and town hall meetings. Mr. Speaker, more than 9,000 regular members completed the survey, and more than 650 participated in town hall meetings. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to thank those who took part for helping us define what a labor relations system for RCMP members would look like. The consultation report was valuable in assisting the government to create a legislative framework that would be in line with the Supreme Court ruling and also take into account the views of those it affects. Bill C-7 provides for independent, binding arbitration as the dispute resolution process for bargaining impasses. This means that, consistent with other police forces across the country, the members of the RCMP bargaining unit would not be permitted to strike. The bill also would provide for a single national bargaining unit composed solely of RCMP members appointed to a rank and reservists. And the RCMP bargaining agent, should one be certified, would have as its primary mandate the representation of RCMP members. The government also consulted with jurisdictions with RCMP police service agreements. This was in addition to the regular meetings that take place between the government and these jurisdictions to discuss issues related to the quality and cost of those services. Mr. Speaker, we have taken a fair and reasonable approach to examining this complex matter. And now, with the amendments proposed under Bill C-7, RCMP members and reservists would have statutory collective bargaining rights as other Canadians. Our government recognizes that collective bargaining and Canadians' fundamental freedoms are vital to a healthy democracy in which people can move forward together. This week's budget reaffirmed the government's commitment to bargain in good faith with the public service. This commitment to collective bargaining is further demonstrated under Bill C-7. Mr. Speaker, it's time that RCMP members have the opportunity to decide whether to exercise these rights. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the timelines associated with the Supreme Court of Canada's decisions are tight. It is critical that the government enact a new labor relations regime for RCMP members by May 16, 2016, when the court's declaration of unconstitutionality comes into effect. Nonetheless, the Government of Canada will continue to work with Parliament and its committees throughout the legislative process in an open and engaging manner. And I think I can say without fear of contradictions that all parties in this House support fair relations and fair labor relations for the brave men and women who put their lives on the line for our country every day. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this day, March 24, marks the anniversary of one of the happiest days in my life, the birth of the first of my three daughters, Ariel Diorio. Bonne fête, Ariel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Happy birthday, Ariel.
Questions and comments? Qu'est-ce commentaire? The Honourable Member for Churchill, Kiwantanik, Askey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and As we've indicated in the NDP, that we certainly support this bill at second reading, but we also have some serious questions about what this new this new arrangement, the new labour relations model would mean in terms of dealing with the serious allegations of sexual harassment, which we know to be out there. We know to be a very serious issue. The allegations that women in the RCMP have come forward with, and we are concerned that the right kind of processes are not in place, and we certainly haven't seen the right the kind of leadership that we need to see on this front. So I'd like to hear from the government what they propose in terms of dealing with these very serious allegations.
The honourable member for Saint-Léonard Saint-Michel.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais remercier ma collègue.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent question. Mr. Speaker, the issues surrounding harassment, alleged harassment, are completely distinct and separate from the subject that we are discussing here today. What we need to bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, is that the Supreme Court of Canada brought down a decision. The Parliament, as a democracy with a charter, must take into account that decision and take action and act accordingly. So we must take this action, and this bill is a legislative framework regarding labor relations. So any issue associated with events surrounding harassment, alleged cases of harassment, because the situation varies in certain places, but that must be the subject of a separate debate.
Question commentaire. The honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, when the honourable member's constituents voted for him, they had a secret ballot in terms of how they were going to exercise their right to democracy. When unions choose a leader, they do it by secret ballot. When unions make decisions around whether to go on strike or not, that is done by secret ballot. I find it very, very unusual that this Liberal government, not only with C-525, where they have basically said secret ballots don't matter, even though in many provinces it does, how can they justify taking such a profoundly personal decision for our RCMP officers and not giving them the respect and the right of a secret ballot?
Well, member for Saint-Léonard Saint-Michel.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague opposite for her question, which is a pertinent one. Mr. Speaker, remember the fundamental principles of labor relations governing our society. The government here takes action for men and women on a daily basis, provide their services to the country and to the people of this country. The government is making them available to them a regime that is similar to that of other groups in society. And it's based on a voluntary membership, so they can decide on their own if they are going to enter into an association, and there will be a threshold that will be established that will lead to accreditation, and a specialized tribunal that will also deal with the issue mentioned by the honourable colleague opposite. Representations are made on behalf of the employer and the association, and if members want to intervene individually, they'll have to take into account the specific rules of that tribunal to see if they're authorized to do so. Thank you.
Question commentaire. The honourable Parliament Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member through the chair. Given that the last two major reviews of federal private sector labour legislation both found that the card check system was an effective way of gauging employee support, and given that holding a secret ballot representation is typically more time-consuming and costly than card check, and given that the board has the option of adding a vote if they're not satisfied with the card check, could the member just discuss why the board having a choice as what to apply in terms of certification method is better than a one-size-fits-all situation, no matter what the current situation may be?
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Thank my honourable colleague for a question. Mr. Speaker, what we important elements in the question are regarding the card check system. It is one of the options that exist, and what's very important is the role of the tribunal here. There is a specialized tribunal that is best suited to make that determination. There are obviously two systems. One would be to have a vote, and the other one would be to have card check. But as the honourable member points in her question, there is the possibility of also harmonizing both. It's not either or. It could be a situation where initially there is card check, and at some point the tribunal decides that there would be a vote. So it is not mutually exclusive options. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have time for one more short question and response. Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments from my colleague, and I must compliment him on recognizing his daughter's birthday being today. Our family is indeed very important to us. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we need to highlight is the fact that the RCMP officers and reserves were actually extensively canvassed for their opinions, and there was three conclusions. One was that there was a need for a union. It seemed to be very overwhelmingly supportive, that there be a single national bargain unit, and that in fact there be a binding arbitration as opposed to a strike position. And I'm wondering if he could just comment in terms of just how important it is that we listen to what the RCMP officers themselves are saying.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
This question, Mr. Speaker, the issue is so crucial that obviously we have these men and women that put their lives on the line every day, that give great service to this country. So you obviously have to start with the people who know best, the individuals who perform the work on every day. And as the honourable colleague from the NDP pointed out earlier, her father, and reminding the great service that he rendered to this country, every day these people render service. They're the ones who are the best specialists to determine what it is that they are looking for and what it is that would suit their need and their vision. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, what we have to never lose sight of, we also have to take into consideration the interests of the population of Canada, Canadians, and the country. So there is more than one constituent. Yes, the employees are one. Yes, the employer is one. Yes, Canadians are one. But also, let's not forget the country.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel will have 2 minutes remaining for the period for questions and comments when the House next resumes debate on the question. We're now going to statements by members. Déclaration de député.
Statements by members. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, Acadians strongly denounce the anti-Francophone hateful comments on the internet site of the CBC, and following a lot of pressure, the CBC decided to change its practices. We asked some time ago that this House condemn the comments against Quebecers in the Energy East file. This type of hate speech against Francophones is increasingly frequent in Anglophone media in Canada and Quebec. We all need to condemn misogyny, homophobia, bullying, Islamophobia, and prejudice against Indigenous people. But there is another prejudice as well, and that is Francophobia. We need to say here in this House that we denounce that kind of speech, because Acadians and Francophones across Canada should not feel threatened when they wish to assert their vitality.
Mr. Speaker, Mary Fay is welcomed back home to the village of Chester, Nova Scotia as a world champion. The 17-year-old curler skipped her Canadian team to victory at the World Junior Curling Championships in Denmark earlier this month. Mary and her Nova Scotia teammates Kristen Clark of Halifax, Carly Burgess of Truro, Janique LeBlanc of Fall River, and the 5th Sarah Daniels, along with their coach Andrew Atherton, were undefeated in round-robin play, where they faced off against teams from around the world. Mary was also recognized with the Sportswoman Award for the tournament. Mr. Speaker, I also want to recognize the outpouring of support and pride for this extraordinary team of young women in communities across Nova Scotia. Finally, I wanted to offer congratulations from the House to the Canadian men's junior team who won bronze at the World Championships. Congratulations to all once again. You've done us proud.
Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, as you and many others in this House know, I have known Canadian teacher Neil Bandelman and his family for a long time. In fact, I just met with his brother Guy a few moments ago. Neil is well known in Calgary as a respected teacher there for many years. Sadly, Neil continues to be held in an Indonesian prison in deplorable conditions and forced to live like a caged animal. He has to sleep on the floor and endures constant hunger, discomfort, and threat of disease. He is a victim of a flawed Indonesian justice system, but our own Canadian government has failed him too. They have failed to bring this Canadian back home or warn other Canadians of the risks visiting this country. Guy wants his brother home. The entire Bandelman family wants Neil home. Unfortunately, all this government has done and is prepared to do is to talk. When are we going to see action? Many Canadians are asking, when are we going to see Neil come home to Canada?
The Honourable Member for Willowdale.
Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to rise in the House today to acknowledge Nowruz, the spring equinox celebrated by 300 million people around the world and hundreds of thousands of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. A 3,000-year-old tradition, Nowruz is a much-cherished historic holiday for Persians, Afghans, Turks, Kurds, and many others with cultural roots in Western and Central Asia. This joyous holiday, celebrated for several millennia, is a festive occasion that brings together people of different cultures and languages to mark renewal. The holiday celebrates the significance of family, community, and new beginnings. And speaking of new beginnings, last night I had the honour to join the Minister for Democratic Institutions and the Member of Parliament for Richmond Hill to convene the first ever Nowruz reception on Parliament Hill. Many members of this House and hundreds of guests joined us together around the HoC to celebrate the arrival of spring and the dawn of a new year. We were particularly honoured to have the Right Honourable Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs join us to mark this historic first celebration of Nowruz on Parliament Hill.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to recognize Vimy Ridge Day, which is observed April 9th each year. 2016 is the 99th anniversary of a battle that served to define our nation and people as fierce defenders of justice and peace. Many lives were lost that day, sons, husbands, and fathers who vanished on the battlefields of France beneath the guns of war. My great-uncle, George Mount, was among those who never returned after Vimy Ridge 99 years ago. It was an honour to visit Canada's monument in France and find his name carved in the stone amongst all those who lost their lives. The memorial stands as a humbling reminder of the fallen soldiers who paid for their service to Canada with their lives. We must remember those at Vimy and those who have served since. We owe a debt of gratitude to our veterans because they and their families continue to make sacrifices for our security here at home and around the world.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud to have Algonquin College in my riding, a leading global educational institution with over 20,000 full-time students. Just one among their many innovative programs, the Algonquin College Construction Research Centre is a hub of local applied research and innovation. A
few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit the center that is partly funded by the federal government. They're using high-tech technology and working with leaders in the construction industry, in the private sector, to be skilled for the new labor market. The center was built on a three-dimensional focus.
Algonquin College for their work in supporting students' creativity. Thank you.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend around the world, those of the Christian faith will celebrate Easter. Western civilization, our parliamentary institutions, human rights, Canadian Constitution, common law, criminal law, Code Civil, all have deep roots in Christianity. Our traditions and cultures have evolved over time from the promise of a coming Messiah in the Old Testament and the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. We're promised everlasting life when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. The struggles of our daily lives and the sacrifices that we make pale in comparison to the sacrifice of our Savior, Jesus Christ. He died on the cross at Calvary to pay for our sins, and then he rose from the grave to give us hope for our resurrection and eternal life. This weekend, we celebrate the life and death of our Lord Jesus Christ, but even more, we celebrate his victory over death.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for La Salle et Mar-Verdun.
A very important part of my riding's history, the Scottish community. Scottish immigrants first settled in Quebec over 400 years ago, making them one of the founding peoples of Quebec and Montreal. In honour of the contributions the Scottish community has made to the economic, social and cultural development of Montreal and Quebec, as well as the friendship forged between Scottish communities and Quebecois communities, the Quebec National Assembly has formally declared April 6th Tartan Day. Verdun is also home to the annual Highland Games, Mr. Speaker, a cultural celebration that started in 1978, jointly organized by the St. Andrew's Society and the Sons of Scotland. Je suis fier.
I am proud of the constituents in my riding who have shown determination in maintaining their tradition and heritage that they share with Quebecers, and I would invite you to wear your tartan on April 6th and join us in Verdun for the Montreal Scottish Games on July 31st.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to start by wishing my daughter Phoebe a happy birthday. She is 11 today. I also want to talk about an important event in my riding. It is the day to celebrate Greek independence.
It's the 195th anniversary of the Greek War of Independence. In my community of Toronto Danforth, Greek Canadians make up a large portion of the residents and business owners. The Danforth has a proud history and continues to be a major focal point for the Greek Canadians from Toronto and across Canada. That's why next weekend, Greek Canadians will be celebrating Greece's Independence Day and their contribution to Canada over the years. I'm happy to join the Greek community of Toronto in this tremendous parade.
In addition, the Toronto City Hall will be flying the Greek flag on March 29 to celebrate this important date for the Greek community. Thank you.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm honoring Frank Kinsella, former mayor of Leeds in the Thousand Islands Township in my riding of Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. He died March 9th at age 75. He was a councillor and then mayor in the 1960s in Black River, Matheson Township in Northern Ontario. And following 12 years as Director of Education for the local school board in my riding, he served one term as a councillor in Gananoque and then councillor and mayor in the Township of Leeds in the Thousand Islands. Past president of Rotary clubs in both Brockville and Gananoque, he helped launch Probus clubs in both communities and worked on polio eradication initiatives in India. I had the pleasure to work with Mr. Kinsella on several projects, and I had many discussions with him on how best to help the community, his favorite subject. He knew how to bring people and resources together to get positive results for everyone. Mr. Speaker, I offer the condolences of the House to his wife, Mary Lou, his 5 children, Kurt, Dave, Grant, Mary, Anthony, and his 5 grandchildren. Mayor Frank, my friend, rest in peace.
Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday marked the Hindu festival of Holi, known as Festival of Color or the Festival of Sharing Love. This ancient festival is celebrated by Indo-Canadians. It originated in India, but is also celebrated in many parts of South Asia, such as Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. This holiday represents the unofficial start of spring and symbolizes the triumph of good over evil. It is celebrated by throwing color powders at one another. It is furthermore an opportunity to gather with family and friends to celebrate the importance of love and togetherness. Tonight, I'll be hosting an event at Sir John A. Macdonald Building to celebrate this joyous occasion. Several hundred people are expected to attend. I have sent invitations to all the members of this House and sincerely hope to see many of you there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mississauga Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment to share with the House how angry I am. The terrorist attacks in Brussels this week makes me angry. The killing of unsuspecting innocent civilians makes me angry. Listening to terrorists pretend to speak in the name of my faith makes me angry. The willingness of some humans to inflict carnage on their fellow human makes me angry. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want to tell you that reading many touching stories of humanity and compassion in the aftermath of such horrific attacks offers me comfort. Hearing many people from different backgrounds rally together and vow to confront such acts offer me comfort. Watching many resist the temptation to succumb to anger and instead offer resolved, thoughtful, and firm responses offers me comfort. Today, we need to open our hearts and extend our hearts to Brussels and victims of terrorism everywhere and reassure them that we stand with them.
The member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to recognize my seatmate, colleague, and friend, Jim Hillier. Ironically, or I guess appropriately, this was Jim's speaking spot that we had traded. He wanted to get back to his treatment and to his kids. And so, ironically, this was his spot. My wife and I got to be friends with Jim and Libby shortly after they arrived here in 2011, and we arrived as well. We were on trips together, and we got to know each other and soon became friends. We both had 4 children and had a lot of common interests. He was a man of deep conviction and purpose, and from the daily conversations to Monday night MP hockey, where we knew him as the sniper, he will be missed. I say today to Livy, his children, nation, Asia, Taylor, and London, we are here for you. Lastly, to Jim, from all of us, may you rest in peace, old friend.
Thank the member for that. The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Today, we all mourn the loss of a dear colleague and friend, the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner. Fellow Albertans in this House know that Jim was a dedicated and dynamic representative for our province who would always stand up for his constituents, for Albertans, and indeed for all Canadians. Lors de son trop court passage,
he was here for too short of time in the Parliament of Canada, but he served on 7 different committees over 5 years. During the second session of the 41st Parliament, he served on the Heritage Committee, and his wisdom still informs our work.
Know that Jim was a fighter. though he had to abandon a nomination for a provincial election because he was diagnosed with leukemia, his absence from public life was temporary. Jim left only to come back later, this time as a Member of Parliament for Lethbridge. Last fall, electors in his new riding of Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner also decided to place their confidence in him. A dedicated volunteer, a community leader, a loving father of four, Jim Hillier will be sorely missed by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. To his wife, Livy, and his 4 children, I'd like to offer my deepest condolences.
Thank you. The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm fortunate to represent the riding of South Okanagan, West Kootenay, a riding full of magnificent mountains and deep valleys. And each of those watersheds has a group of hardworking citizens, almost all of them volunteers, who have dedicated themselves to the task of stewarding the natural world they live in. These stewardship groups work to protect their watersheds, to maintain the incredible biodiversity found in both the mountains and the valleys, and to ensure that activities in their region are truly sustainable. And whether they are trying to keep invasive plants out of their grasslands or alien mussels out of their lakes, protecting a spectacular migration of toads, or informing landowners of best practices on living with endangered species, these groups work tirelessly to keep their valleys healthy and rich in natural diversity. So from the Arrow Lakes and Slocan Valley, Christina Lake and the Kettle River to the deserts of the South Okanagan, I salute the valuable work of stewardship groups in my riding and across Canada.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, April 2nd is World Autism Awareness Day, and 18 years since my son Jaden was diagnosed. Life with Jaden hasn't exactly been as we'd planned. He's never made the honor roll or attended university or heard his name called at the NHL draft. In no way is this a disappointment. Those were simply not the right plans for Jaden. To measure his value by IQ or income or goals and assists would be to completely misunderstand who he is. Jaden has a truly rare and beautiful nature, an immeasurable blend of honesty, authenticity, innocence, and genuine love. It is an indescribable joy to witness him grow up, with a childlike vulnerability and sense of wonder that the rest of us sadly lose over time. Life with Jaden may not be what we'd planned, but we do not celebrate any less. We just celebrate different things. It's a lesson learned through experience, and one I wouldn't trade for the world.
It's good to have Jaden here today. The honourable member. The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
It is an honor to stand in this place to help promote awareness of epilepsy by recognizing Purple Day this coming Saturday, March 26th. Thousands of people across Canada will wear purple as they celebrate our nation's leadership in epilepsy awareness. I'm proud to remind this House that it was my very good friend and yours, Mr. Speaker, Cassidy Megan, a young Nova Scotian who founded Purple Day in 2008 at the age of 9, to raise international awareness about epilepsy. Canada is now a world leader in this cause thanks to caring citizens like Cassidy. I thank my colleagues, many of whom are all too familiar with epilepsy, for their generous support and for wearing purple in the House today. Please take a moment to share that pride with your constituents using the hashtag PurpleDay2016. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales. Honorable chef de l'opposition.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This budget is a betrayal of the middle class. Families are being asked to return their universal childcare checks. Moms and dads are no longer able to claim a tax credit for putting their kids in soccer or dance class. And the tax credit for textbooks or education is gone. Mr. Speaker, why are middle-class families being stuck with the bill to pay for this Liberal spending spree?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the budget we put forward for Canadians. We're particularly proud that we've been able to meet up to our promises to middle-class Canadians. We started on January 1st by reducing taxes on 9 million Canadians, put more money in their pockets each and every paycheck. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, our approach to Canada Child Benefits improves the lives of 9 out of 10 families with children. They will have on average $2,300 more per year, including the measures that were taken for families mentioned by the member opposite. We are very proud of what we've done for families, and we know that this is an important first step on helping Canadian families to deal with the challenge.
Well, the Honourable Member of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the budget confirms that Liberals can't manage the economy. They told Canadians in the last election that they would run a modest deficit of $10 billion. Now they're borrowing 3 times what they promised, along with tax increases on the middle class. That's not what Canadians voted for. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians trust this government to grow our economy and create jobs when they can't even keep a simple promise to Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, after 10 years of low growth, Canadians elected a new government. They asked us to do 2 things. They asked us to help the middle class, and they asked us to grow the economy. So, Mr. Speaker, we are so proud to start down the path of growing the economy. We're making investments in infrastructure. We are developing an innovation agenda that can make a real difference for this generation and future generations of Canadians, so they will have a better future for themselves and their families.
As we know, members will sometimes hear things here they may not like, they may not agree with. But I know we all have the capacity to be professional and listen carefully and quietly and show respect and wait for our turn to have a chance. And now it's the turn of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claimed that his promise to balance the budget in 4 years was set in stone. But because of this year's Liberals' borrowing, each family across Canada now owes about $3,000 more. With no plan to balance the budget again, that number will only continue to grow. He's already forcing families to stop claiming a tax credit for putting their kids in hockey or art. Which taxes does he plan to increase this year, next year, and the year after that to pay for his spending spree?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for her question because it gives me an opportunity again to say how proud we are of our budget. A budget that is helping middle-class Canadians across this country. We started with helping 9 million Canadians with tax reductions. But more importantly, we are moving forward on helping Canadians, 9 out of 10 Canadian families with children, with an average of $2,300 more per year. This will help them to lead better lives and deal with the challenges that they face in raising their children.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the budget tabled Wednesday confirms our fears. A $10 billion deficit has been announced, but we're going to have $30 billion. And I will quote the Federation of Quebec Chambers of Commerce. The absence of a plan to get back to balanced budget is worrisome and weakens the government's fiscal position. Will the government confirm that it has abandoned its plan to get back to striking a balance? Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of our budget. A few months ago, people said 2 things to us. Try to make sure that the middle class can be in a better situation and grow the economy. We will start with our program to grow the economy. That's our fiscal plan. It's very important to invest now with low interest rates and an opportunity to do something that will improve the situation for the following generations. That's our plan. That's the plan that Canadians asked us for. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, during the campaign, they announced a deficit of $10 billion for infrastructure. In this week's budget, we see an operational deficit of $30 billion, but only $2.9 billion for infrastructure. How can they explain this? This will recur all the time. How can the minister say this when he's only going to deliver $2.9 billion worth of infrastructure spending? The Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, our investments are important for the next generations. It's very important to invest in infrastructure. We will start with $11.9 billion in the next decade and $2 billion for the next 3 years for universities, $3.4 billion for federal infrastructure. These investments are very important to improve our growth rate. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Mr. Speaker, when Air Canada came to Parliament looking for public investment, the answer was yes, but Parliament set down in law a very specific condition. Maintenance work had to be done in Canada. The courts have repeatedly ruled that Air Canada broke the law. Thousands of Canadian workers lost their jobs. Today, instead of upholding the rule of law, instead of enforcing this legislation, the government is retroactively changing the law to let the scofflaw Air Canada off the hook. Do they not understand that the foundation of democracy is that the law has to apply equally, even to the well-connected?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation has evolved, of course, enormously since 2012, and we're delighted that Air Canada has decided to make an investment in purchasing Bombardier aircraft. Not only that, doing the maintenance of those aircraft in Quebec over the next 20 years, as well as participating in setting up a centre of excellence, not only in Quebec, but also in Manitoba, and also an agreement with the government of Manitoba to create 150 jobs there. This is good news for the aerospace industry. The member across should be delighted for Canada.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
No, Mr. Speaker, we're not delighted with a Liberal government that believes that the rich and well-connected can get off without obeying the law. No, we're not. They have gone so far as to change this law retroactively. It's Orwellian. It says that the provisions are deemed never to have come into force and are therefore repealed. They broke the law. The jobs, those thousands of workers lost good-paying jobs. Thousands of Canadian families were thrown out in the streets. How can they live with themselves by letting the rich, the powerful, the well-connected off the hook, to whom the law no longer applies?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a law that was put in place 28 years ago. The world has evolved. Air Canada is a company that must compete on a level playing field across Canada with other competitors and also internationally. We have, as a result of the Quebec government and the Manitoba government deciding not to litigate any further against Air Canada, felt that this was an appropriate time to clarify the law, to modernize it, so that Air Canada can compete with the rest of the world.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Clarified, it needed to be enforced and respected. Let's look at another recent example of where those who are in need are not respected by the Liberals. The courts ruled that First Nations children are victims of racial discrimination, and yet the Liberals are refusing to provide equitable funding for First Nations child welfare as specifically required by the courts. So, why is the Liberal government failing to respect that court decision?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we are very proud that we will be making an investment of $634.8 million in child welfare for First Nations children. We will respect the tribunal who understands that this system needs to be reformed. We will work with the leadership of First Nations, with provinces and territories to change this system so that First Nations children get to stay with their families and in their communities, and we will work with Dr. Blackstock at the same time.
Honourable Member for Outremont.
No less an authority than Cindy Blackstock, who brought this case, has confirmed that the Liberal government is failing to live up to the court-ordered investment for child welfare in First Nations. She knows that. Now, let's also look at what the Liberals are up to today. 1,685 public service jobs are on the chopping block. Their explanation, quote, "We're not going to outsource everything." That's supposed to reassure people. Was firing thousands of workers what Liberals really meant by repairing the broken relationship with the public service?
The Honourable Minister of Public Service and Procurement.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to an enterprise-wide solution. The report that was tabled and that was reported on was from 2014. We have no intention of following through on that strategy. We have just committed in this budget to over $384 million to Shared Services Canada. So we are committed to Shared Services Canada, to making sure that Canadians and clients get the services that they need.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Grant.
Mr. Speaker, there's no such thing as free money, and small business owners are going to pay the price. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business called it a brutal budget for small businesses, filled with broken promises and higher taxes. Small businesses are the job creators in this country, but clearly the Prime Minister still thinks that most small businesses are just rich tax dodgers. Why is the Prime Minister killing jobs by punishing small businesses with higher taxes?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we are, again, so concerned that we are helping Canadians across this country. We know that our budget is an important budget for small and medium-sized businesses. We know that when small and medium-sized business owners wake up in the morning, what they care about is a strong and robust economy. They need that to make their business work. We know that they care about customers and clients that can buy their goods and services. So helping the middle class helps those people who can actually buy goods and services from small and medium-sized businesses. We know we've made a real difference for those businesses with our budget.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Grant.
Mr. Speaker, there is no jobs plan in this budget. It's a plan for massive spending on Liberal interests, and the Finance Minister has no plans to pay it back. The Liberals talk about economic growth, but this budget is pure smoke and mirrors. Why is the Finance Minister burdening Canadians with $100 billion in new debt, and why do job creators have to pay for it?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians asked us to do two things in the last election. They asked us to help the middle class, and they asked us to grow the economy. We've started out with helping the middle class. We are putting more money in the pockets of people who faced a generation of not getting enough money in their paychecks. But more importantly, we're moving forward with a plan to make a real difference for the next generation of Canadians, a more innovative and prosperous economy that can help our children and grandchildren to lead better lives.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. The Minister just said something interesting. He said it'll make a difference for next generations. Well, indeed, future generations will pay for your poor management of public funds. That's what's going to happen. I know that the member knows full well that he must address the chair and not other members directly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to conduct myself accordingly. I respect you a great deal. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is that this government decided to abolish tax credits that are very important for families. They're abolishing it for sporting activities, artistic activities, and school supplies. Why is this government harming families? Why is it sending the bill to our grandchildren who will pay the bill for their poor judgment? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of our budget because it really favors the middle class. It is a budget that has a child tax benefit. 9 out of 10 families with children will be in a better position because of this measure. On average, they will have $2,300 more to buy things important to them. That's a very important thing, and that's why we're very proud of the budget. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. You shouldn't be proud of living with money that you don't have and sending the bill to your grandchildren. If we look at this, for Quebec, there's nothing to create wealth or jobs, nothing for expansion of the Optics Institute or the Nordic Institute. The mayor of Quebec City said he was very worried. This demonstrates that this government has no plan to create jobs or create wealth. Why is it abandoning the real creators of wealth and jobs, the small and medium-sized business sector? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we know that for the next generation, the most important thing is to have economic growth. We'll begin with our budget with important assistance. We will start with a fund for academics to improve the opportunity to conduct research, to improve their infrastructure for the next generation. We will help students too. They will be the innovators of the future. So this is a budget that truly helps Canada have a better economic growth rate in the future.
Mr. Speaker, there's a question that the Honourable Finance Minister keeps rather obviously avoiding and evading, which is why he the Prime Minister chose to violate.
We haven't seemed to have a problem with sound and with translation. Wait a moment until that we're underway. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
I normally don't have a problem with sound, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a question for the Finance Minister is why he keeps evading this very key question. He says that the Liberal Party made 2 commitments to voters in the last election. He's completely forgotten the central engagement for fiscal responsibility, for balanced budgets in this term, for $25 billion in debt. Instead, he's delivered $119 billion in debt and counting. The Prime Minister said that budgets balance themselves, that there's a absolute commitment to balance the budget. Why did this Finance Minister so utterly violate that fundamental commitment to Canadian voters?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by saying it's nice to get a question from the Honourable Member for the first time. I appreciate it. I want to remind him that he was part of a government that left us with a deficit and left us with $150 billion of additional debt. We are now turning to how we can grow the economy for the next generation of Canadians. We're making investments that can make a real difference in this country for the future, investments in infrastructure and innovation so that the children of today and their children will have a better future for Canada.
Order. I know it's rare, but as I was saying earlier, sometimes we hear things we're not in agreement with. Don't like too much, but I know we have the capacity to restrain ourselves. And I know we're all anxious to hear the Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
I've seen a lot of things in this place, Mr. Speaker, but never a finance minister so blatantly contradicts his own department, which said this week that this government will not pay $4 billion surplus for the first 3 quarters of this year. Mais la question centrale est
But the central question is, why is it that this government violated a solemn election promise to have a balanced budget within this government's mandate with no more than $25 billion in new debt? They will increase the federal debt by $120 billion right at the outset.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, We know that the way to deal with an economy that's had low growth, the way to deal with demographic challenges is to make investments in the future. We know that by making investments in the future, we can have a better fiscal situation for our children and our grandchildren. That's exactly what Canadians asked us to do, and that's exactly what we've started down. We know the investments we're making this year and next year will help us to grow the economy, and that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly the right thing to do.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-les-Masques. With their budget, the Liberals missed a great opportunity to reduce economic inequality, while the government went back on its word and maintains a tax loophole for stock options that benefit the wealthy, while our seasonal workers are left by the wayside. Why is the Minister of Finance helping millionaires to the detriment of workers in need? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of our budget. We started with measures that are very important for the taxes of the middle class. We also want an innovative economy. We listen to people who own innovative companies. We try to get investments that could help our economy be more innovative in the future. The honourable member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Well,
Canada, Mr. Speaker, and budgets are about choices, and Liberals chose tax breaks for wealthy CEOs over helping Canadians. During the campaign, Liberals made a big deal about the importance of immediate spending on infrastructure, but Tuesday's budget turned out to be a shell game. No stable, predictable funding, and many investments are delayed for years. Over $3.4 billion is missing from the first 2 years alone. Why are they backtracking from their signature promise of immediate investments in infrastructure?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Under the leadership of the Minister of Infrastructure, we created the most important and significant infrastructure program in the history of Canada. $160 million for green infrastructure and more for public transit. It's good for Canada. It's good for our economy, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Some of the Liberal broken promises are good news. I want to thank the government for heeding my advice to abandon its plan to double taxation on stock options. Yet, another broken promise will kill jobs by targeting small business with an additional $1 billion in taxation. Why has the budget betrayed the middle class by breaking promises to the tune of $1 billion to our small business job creators?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for his question. We have decided to maintain the small business tax rate where it is, at 10.5%. We have decided to focus on how we can grow the economy so that small and medium-sized businesses can have a successful opportunity to grow their businesses. We've decided to help the middle class so they can buy the goods and services from small businesses that small businesses want to sell and the middle-class Canadians need. This is a budget that will make a huge difference for businesses across this country, and a positive one.
Now, the member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are middle class. The Stats Canada data demonstrates the average full-time self-employed person in Canada earned about $40,000 a year. Not enough to qualify for the Liberal so-called middle-class tax plan, but apparently enough to pay higher taxes because of this $1 billion broken promise. The Liberal government promised that the rate would be 9%. Instead, it's 10.5%. Why has the Liberal government betrayed the middle class with this $1 billion broken promise to small businesses?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Small Business and Tourism.
Calling for the question, and I'd like just to remind him of a few details in the budget that makes us proud that we are supporting small businesses. We know that there are strong and vibrant part of our economy. And our government is making very, very important investments which will directly help small businesses, like the $11.9 billion in infrastructure spending. That'll make sure goods and services and clients can get to these businesses. We're spending $500 million in broadband in rural and remote areas. That's a direct impact on small business. $50 million for the Industrial Research Program. Another $4 million for the Canadian Technical Acceleration Initiative, and $800 million for an innovation.
That's a little less. All right. The honourable member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals broke their promise to business owners by suspending the tax cut to small businesses. On December 11th, the Minister of Small Business stood in this House and stated, "I will be working closely with the Minister of Finance to ensure that our commitment to lower the tax burden on small businesses is fulfilled."
How did that go?
Mr. Speaker, why did the Minister decide to flip-flop and lobby her own government for higher taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question and reminder of the list of items that I just rattled off that we are helping a small business. We do understand the impact of small business. We understand that they represent 90% and contribute over 40% of our GDP. That's why we're working hard with them to ensure that they can avail of all the programs and the initiatives that we announced in our budget that we're proud of, and we will work with small and medium-sized businesses from coast to coast to coast to ensure they get the support they need going forward, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals mislead Canadian small businesses. They said one thing and did the other. Conservatives believe the best way to help small businesses is trade, training, and tax cuts. Instead, Liberals are killing small business with taxes, and more taxes. When will the Liberals stop raising taxes on job creators?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to remind my honourable colleague of another initiative we had in our budget that we're very proud of, which was to increase marketing money for Destination Canada, increasing it by $50 million. We know that most of these tourism industries are small and medium-sized businesses. What that $50 million is going to do is bring more customers to them, driving across our new roads and bridges, too, I might add. Investment in Destination Canada is going to have a huge impact from coast to coast to coast in our tourism industry.
I'm starting to get the impression that members may have been into the Easter chocolate a bit early. So maybe we could try to calm down a little and listen carefully to the questions and the answers. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, all experts and stakeholders agree that we need to start making strategic investments in home care now. We have seniors being kept in hospital beds simply because we don't have the resources to care for them in our communities. Now, during the last campaign, the Liberals told Canadians they would invest $3 billion over 4 years in home care. Wow. But what does the Liberal budget commit? Absolutely nothing. Now, why are Liberals abandoning their promise to invest in home care when this money is so badly needed?
Very good question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question. I stand with my colleagues on this side of the House proud of the budget that we presented this week, proud of the fact that the Canada Health transfer is the largest in Canadian history in the amount of $36 billion. I have committed, as this House knows, to work with my counterparts in the provinces and territories. We are working every day towards a new long-term agreement that will include a number of initiatives, including a $3 billion investment in home care. And we look forward to announcing that once the agreement has been undertaken. Thank you.
Very good. The Honourable Member for Essex.
There you go. A lofty campaign promise on health, another Liberal promise broken. The budget was also very disappointing for farmers in the agricultural sector. Nothing for farmers who face significant losses under CETA. And let's compare to Liberal promises.
The budget slashed research funding, cut new CFIA investments, and dropped any mention of the Value-Added Investment Fund. The agricultural sector is a pillar of the economy in many regions of our country, including southwestern Ontario. Why did Liberals break their promise to our nation's farmers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the question. It just gives me a chance to indicate that our government took essential steps to help grow the middle class and revitalise the economy and put money in people's pockets. We also announced a $500 million. We also announced a $500 million for rural broadband internet, Mr. Speaker, which is vitally important. I think the House must realise that farmers live in rural areas. We farmers live in rural areas. We farmers are business people, and we farmers have business to conduct.
The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, during the last election, Canadians voted for a plan to ensure that those who need the help the most are there to receive it. Instead of helping the wealthiest, Canadians chose a progressive plan that will give the most help to those who really need it and help to the middle class. Can the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development update the House on the latest developments regarding the monthly tax-free Canada Child Benefit?
Madame Ministre du Développement Social.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the question. I am so delighted and so proud to be part of a team that will be implementing the most significant social policy innovation in a generation, Mr. Speaker. This new Canada Child Benefit will be simpler, non-taxable, and will benefit 9 families out of 10. Will take 300 children out of poverty, and Mr. Speaker, it will mean up to $6,400 per child under 6, $5,400 for other children.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister began his budget speech acknowledging the terrible attack in Belgium, which shows the risks that countries like Canada face from global terror. He then went on to announce billions in new spending. $12 million for lawyers to sue the federal government, $85 million for union managers, $675 million for the CBC. But how much for frontline public safety agencies keeping us safe? Zero, Mr. Speaker. When will the Liberal government make the safety of Canadians a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I begin by noting that since 2010, Conservative investment in the RCMP fell by $245 million. We are in the process of repairing the damage that was done by the previous administration. Program integrity support for the RCMP will ensure funding sufficiency, while overall support for the force is reassessed by Treasury Board. We're investing $128 million over 2 years to improve the physical infrastructure for law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and we're investing $60 million in forensics.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, despite the rhetoric by government members on the international scene, there are no clear commitments in the budget for fighting terrorism. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, despite the billions that are announced by the government, only $8 million to fight terrorism at a time when our public safety agencies have clearly stated that there's a shortage of resources. Mr. Speaker, what does the Minister of Public Safety intend to do to fight terrorism and to make it a priority for this government?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important initiatives is to deal with counter-radicalization, something that the previous government absolutely failed to do. We made a commitment in the campaign, and we began the funding for it in this budget to establish a Canadian Office for Community Outreach and Counter-Radicalization to work with all of our partners across this country and around the world to make sure that we can head off these tragedies before they happen.
The honourable member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal budget is an attack on our armed forces. They slashed $3.7 billion from the defense budget, and they are killing military procurement for 5 years. And the Liberals our armed forces cannot afford another dark era of Liberal neglect. The Liberals have put us on the sidelines in the war against terrorism. Why won't the Liberal government support our troops?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the only attack on our troops were the $3 billion that were cut from the previous government starting in 2012. We have reprofiled our money for the time when our major acquisitions will be needed. We have increased the operational budget by $360 million, and we added another $200 million for military infrastructure, where $50 million of that will go to military family housing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs refused to acknowledge that Canada is at war against the Islamic State. But many of our allies aren't afraid of calling this conflict what it is, a war. Because of this ideology, the government, or in fact, is it because of this ideology that the government pushed off indefinitely $3.7 billion in investment for armed forces infrastructure and equipment in order to fight the Islamic State? Mr. Speaker, I have a quote from General Vance, the Chief of the Defense Staff.
Armed conflict against a non-state actor, that's the legal terminology. We are a lawful party to an armed conflict against a non-state actor. Le soi-disant État islamique.
The so-called Islamic State wants to be recognized as a state. It shall not be. It is a non-state. That is why we're involved in an armed conflict against these terrorists.
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, today's EI numbers show just how hard cities like Regina and Edmonton have been hit. For weeks, the Liberals have been pledging help for Alberta and Saskatchewan. Yet despite Liberal promises, the budget's only concession for regions hit by the collapse of oil and gas has been an extension of EI benefits. Except this measure excluded Edmonton, Regina, and southern Saskatchewan, where oil workers are being laid off. Why does the budget's EI extension exclude Saskatchewan's oil patch?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
I'm very proud to be standing in the House today to talk about the significant investment that we're putting into those workers that unfortunately have been hit by layoffs across the country. Mr. Speaker, not only are we reducing waiting period for benefits, we're improving service quality, we've ended the negative 2012 changes, we've eliminated the punitive measures to youth, women, and new immigrants, and we've helped those regions of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are preparing to put in place a two-tier unfair EI system. In 12 regions of the country, the benefit period will be extended by 5 weeks. But none of those regions are in Quebec, none in Gaspésie, and nothing, in fact, for the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region. Mr. Speaker, our people back home also need help. The government will be diverting $7 billion from the EI fund, and, in addition, they will be excluding our Quebec seasonal workers. Isn't the minister ashamed of this? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can say is we're very proud to help every region of Canada, including the areas of Quebec and seasonal workers, by reducing the deductible, the waiting period, by improving quality of our service, by eliminating the 2012 negative changes, and by helping young people, new immigrants, and women from coast to coast to coast. Thank you.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is losing its competitive edge to the U.S. when it comes to exporting our oil, and now we're losing it on LNG also. In fact, the ambassador from Japan said if the approval of the environmental assessment is delayed further, Canada may run the risk of missing the chance to export LNG to the growing Asia market for a long time. The Liberals, Mr. Speaker, have no plan for jobs. Why don't they get out of the way and let the private sector in Alberta and BC create jobs? The
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the previous government, we understand that the economy and the environment go together. We are committed to ensuring that the energy sector remains a source of jobs and prosperity, but we remain committed to ensuring that we do proper environmental assessments, a system that was gutted under the previous government. I would like to point out that last Friday we approved an LNG project called Wood Fibre that they might like to look at. But with PNW, they produced additional information, and we are going to do a proper review and ensure that developments are done in a sustainable manner.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, every chance the Liberals get, they delay crucial energy infrastructure projects. They call for moratoriums on oil sands and tankers. They suck up to anti-Canadian energy lobby groups, and they add extra red tape and uncertainty at the very worst time. In 2012, the Justice Minister said, quote, "The country's reputation is at stake with the approval of these projects like Site C and the Enbridge pipeline." How can Canadians trust the Liberals' support energy development and the hundreds of thousands of jobs it provides when senior members of their cabinet are such vocal opponents?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I repeated previously, our government believes that the economy and the environment goes together, and that is the only way that we will get our resources to market. Last Friday, we approved a project because we believe that it met high environmental standards and it made sense for the economy. We are reviewing other projects to ensure that they do the same. We will get projects to market when they are done in a sustainable way, unlike the previous government.
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We don't know whether all 7 new senators, including Mr. Pratt and Mr. Harder, were on the final list submitted by the advisory board to the Prime Minister. If Mr. Pratt was on the list, then the Quebec board has broken its requirement to only nominate qualified persons. If any of the 7 was not on the list, then the Prime Minister has broken his promise to rely upon independent advice. And if there was any communication between the Prime Minister and the advisory board to smooth out these wrinkles, then talk of the advisory board being independent is a farce. One of these 3 scenarios is what actually happened. Which one is it?
Great question. The Honourable Minister for Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate all the individuals who have been appointed to the Senate. They are all outstanding Canadians of the highest merit, and I am confident that they will serve the best interests of Canadians. They also represent the diversity of our great nation. This is an opportunity to thank deepest gratitudes to the individuals on the Independent Advisory Board for reviewing the applications. We look forward to opening the process to all Canadians in a very near future.
Honourable Member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister of Immigration for his incredible achievement in bringing in 25,000 refugees by February 29th. Particularly proud of his commitment to bring in an additional 10,000 by the end of this year. Now, I'd like to ask the Minister about housing for the new arrivals and how the Minister is able to, how he has progressed in helping government-assisted refugees move into permanent housing.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, thank you for the question to my colleague, and I am happy to report to the House that while 3 weeks ago the proportion of refugees in permanent housing stood at 52%, as of yesterday, the proportion of the Syrian refugees in permanent housing had increased to 78%. And, Mr. Speaker, While I have always said that there would be bumps along the way, this is clearly strong progress, and I am confident that every single one of these refugees will be in permanent housing before the end of June.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Budgets are demonstrations of government's priorities, and farm families are convinced that they're not a Liberal priority. Even after borrowing billions of dollars, farmers and farm families were left out in the cold. But there was one suggestion for farm families in the budget. The suggestion was that farmers should become solar and wind power producers so that they would have good jobs. Well, Mr. Speaker, farming is a good job. It's an honourable job. And start defending honourable, hard-working farm families.
Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my colleague's question, but the problem is he did wrong. The fact is, our government took essential steps to grow the middle class, revitalize the economy. The $500 million for the broadband is vital for the rural areas. We farmers live in rural areas. We farmers do business. We also put over 38 million, if you want to listen, at CFIA.
Order. We're hearing way too much noise today. Okay? It's unnecessary. It's inappropriate. Let's show a little respect for each other and for this place. And the honourable member, Minister of Agriculture, has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated, the broadband is so important. Also for money, millions into CFIA and millions into research. And I can tell you, research is so valuable in agriculture, and the gag order is lifted from the scientists too, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Farmers deserve a lot better, Mr. Speaker. On another subject, the Liberals made great promises during the election campaign to the young people of our country. Hundreds of millions of dollars for a youth employment strategy, millions of dollars for youth services programs. Unfortunately, in this budget, there is $365 million less than promised for the next 2 years. Youth organizations are calling for more long-term investments in prevention and to fight the unstable nature of jobs. So why has the Prime Minister, who's responsible for young people, abandoned so cynically the young people in this country?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister for Youth.
I'm proud to answer the question posed by my honourable colleague from Sur-Roi-Salaberry. One of the things that I can say is that we are incredibly proud of what we're doing as a government for our youth. Keep in mind that the previous government did not have a Minister of Youth. Keep in mind that the previous government did not take the needs of our youth seriously. And because of that, we saw that for 10 years, the unemployment rate for young people in this country stayed stagnant at roughly the same amount. We're taking this seriously. We're investing in ensuring that we're providing opportunities, Mr. Speaker, for young people to create jobs, give them opportunities to go to university, and make sure that they have a better future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, in my riding, we have Lac Memphremagog and Champlain Lake, which are covered by the International Boundaries Act, and their two lakes are very important for my constituents because they take their drinking water from them, and there's some 250,000 people who drink the water from those lakes. What does the government intend to do to improve the quality of water in those lakes? Does it plan to invest in the Joint International Commission and to open up dialogue with our U.S. counterparts? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, that question comes from the member of Brome-Missisquoi, who is a great defender of the two lakes in his riding, Memphremagog and Champlain. He understands the importance of those two lakes for the entire region. That's why I want to thank the Minister of Finance for the $7.7 million over 5 years in order to conduct scientific research to ensure that we have the best solutions possible to save those lakes and to clean them up with a safe water for the people in the regions in conjunction with our American counterparts. Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, let the wind blow and the sun shine. And that's the Liberal vision for agriculture. Having read the budget, Canadian farmers are very worried about the lack of attention by the Liberal government for the sector. The significance of agriculture in the Liberal caucus appears to reflect the influence of the minister. Mr. Speaker, where are the commitments in the budget, in this government's budget, on the compensation promised to farmers as part of the economic agreements with Europe and the TPP?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, and I can assure him that this government supports supply management and understands the importance of compensation. And in this budget, Mr. Speaker, we were able to make sure that the middle class grew, that revitalized the economy, and put more money in people's pockets. We also put a broadband out so my honourable colleagues, farmers, would be able to talk on a cell phone. They do business, Mr. Speaker. We farmers do business. We deserve the right to be able to talk on a cell phone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right. Well, whether we're colleagues, order. Order. Whether we're talking on a cell phone or in this house, we always want to hear. Et maintenant, on va écouter dans la République de...
So we'll now go to the Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 1998, the government shut down the workers of Air Canada who were concerned about their jobs by putting in place measures to keep maintenance in 3 cities in Canada. Air Canada has changed its position on this, and the government is not doing anything to respect it. Mr. Speaker, now today the Minister of Transport is tabling legislation which will withdraw Air Canada from these requirements. How can the minister go back on his word to the workers at Avios and abandon the aerospace industry in the province of Quebec, Mr. Speaker? Is this the government's position? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Today's reality, Mr. Speaker, is that the world has significantly evolved, and the legislation that had existed for the past 28 years needs to be updated. Quebec and Manitoba put an end to their legal action against Air Canada, and that enables us to modernize the legislation for Air Canada, which must, as you know, compete throughout the world. Nationally, internationally, it must be in a better position. It must be in a position to make decisions where to do its maintenance activities.
The
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Speaker, the 2012 Omnibus Budget Bill, the infamous C-38, repealed environmental assessment and put in place a bogus, weak Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012, so-called, which has allowed the National Energy Board to make a mockery of real EA. I was shocked to find in this budget at page 166 4 years of funding specifically referenced to keeping the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012 alive. Does the Minister of Environment intend to entrench C-38 or do the right thing and get rid of it?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member opposite for her tireless advocacy on behalf of environmental issues. I was thrilled with the budget. It was the greenest budget ever. Sent a clear signal that we were moving to a low-carbon economy. We're going to create very good, clean jobs, and we're going to provide a more sustainable future for my children, for all of our children. I want to reassure the member opposite that we are committed to a review of our environmental assessment process. The amount of money that was provided for SIA is intended to allow for that and also to support a consultation with
Now I'm going to call upon the Honourable Member for Regina Capel for the usual Thursday question.
Yes, sir. Just before I ask the Thursday question, I wonder if I could find unanimous consent to table the January fiscal monitor, which yet again showed a conservative surplus.
This request sounds familiar. Does the Honourable Member have unanimous consent to table the report? No, there's no consent. Let's go on to the Honourable Member for Regina Capella for Thursday question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in that case, can I move on to the Thursday question? I wonder if the government House Leader will update the House as to the business of this chamber after we return from our Easter break and constituency work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if colleagues are so inclined, I could perhaps table at the end of my answer to the Thursday question this very incisive weekly business statement, but I'll leave that to your judgment, Mr. Speaker. So today, Mr. Speaker, the House is debating, as you know, Bill C-7, the RCMP Labour Relations Act. I believe will conclude second reading, I hope, at the end of the day today. The House will, as my friend noted, adjourn for the Easter break and allow members to return to work in their constituencies. When we return on April 11th, the House will complete the 4 days of debate on the budget. So 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th of April, Mr. Speaker. I know colleagues will want to speak about the budget. Those will be designated as days to debate the budget. Et Monsieur le Président, si vous me permettez.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would just like to take this opportunity to wish you and Callie a very happy Easter, and to all of my colleagues as well, and have a good break.
Orders of the day. Orders of the day.
Government orders, Government Bills Commons, resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-7, an act to amend the Public Service Labor Relations Act, the Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board Act, and other acts, and to provide for other certain measures.
Anthony? Let's do this.
Good afternoon. The honourable member for Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel had 2 minutes left for questions and comments. So are there any questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Yes.
Or North, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the member can just provide comment as to why it is we have Bill C-7 that's here today, the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, and if he wants to add some thoughts as to why it is that it's important we pass this bill as soon as possible.
The Député de Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel.
Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel. I thank my colleague for his question. A brief reminder to put us in context. About 15 years ago, the Supreme Court
had confirmed the existing regime at the time. More recently, we got another Supreme Court decision that reversed that previous decision, given the changes that happened in the interval, which means that the system in place is no longer valid. The government was granted an extension. When the election happened, there was a change of government. We arrived and we found the file as is. So we had to ask for an extra extension of 6 months. In its wisdom, the Supreme Court decided to give us 4 months delay. So that's why it's imperative that we have definitive legislation before March 16, 2016. The central element here is that we need a collective bargaining system. The model for this is left up to the discretion of Parliament. What we're putting forth is a system that reproduces a system that exists for other members of the public service, other government employees. But of course, we have to adapt it in some ways to take into account the unique character of these particular employees and the way they execute their jobs and the responsibilities they have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Resuming debate.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Bill C-7, an act to amend the Public Service Labour Relations Act, the Public Service Labour Relations and Employment Board Act, and other acts to provide for certain other measures. Mr. Speaker, I'll be sharing my time with the member from that great riding of Foothills. Mr. Speaker, as a former member of the RCMP, I was proud to serve with Canada's National Police Force. I recall my first day I joined the force as well as my last day. All of my 35 years were great within that organization. I, like many thousands of other members from the 1960s and 70s, joined Canada's traditional, world-famous red coats. I can attest that it was not the $4,800 a year that I joined up for. It was the pride in serving our great country in Canada's police force. Hear, hear. We went where they wanted us to go, from sea to sea to sea. We were all proud to serve, and we gave much to the force in long hours, no overtime. We got the job done with basic equipment by doing the job with pride. Some of our cars did not have radios in those days. We were notified by a light that was turned on over the community, and we'd have to return to the detachment. But we went there because that was our job. Things needed to change with the rapidly changing times of the 70s. Better equipment, better communications, better working conditions, better compensation. These were the issues facing us. This was accomplished by a unique program that came about in 1974. The RCMP Senior Command listened and made changes. Mr. Speaker, a big change was the Division Staff Relations Representation System, known to the membership as our DSSR. The DSSR moved our force to the forefront. We remain one of the top 10 police forces in Canada in relation to compensation and working conditions through the efforts and great work of the RCMP DSSR system. We needed to have a say in promotions, discipline, and grievances. The DSSR program protected and served our members through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and up to this present day. Today, it appears to have lost some of its effectiveness in promoting working conditions, compensation, etc., for reasons I don't really want to go into today. Mr. Speaker, I was shocked last year when I examined the 2015 RCMP review of the force in comparison to other police forces in Canada. When I proudly served, we were always rated with the top 5 police forces in Canada. Last year, the RCMP were ranked below 50 other police forces in Canada in pay, compensation, limited duration postings, etc. Canada's police force, that is our internationally acclaimed police force, should not be at the bottom of the pile. It should be at the top. Mr. Speaker, my personal feelings is that the DSSR program worked well at one time and could again if all the departments within government work together for the betterment of our men and women in uniform. This also applies to the military, firefighters, and first responders. Those in uniform protect Canadians from harm's way. They often risk their lives in helping serve their communities, their provinces, and their country. Personally, I believe that Canada's National Police Force, the RCMP, should not be unionized. There are so many situations that may complicate how this great organization performs its policing roles in the future. I could go on for quite some time explaining what I foresee as future problems. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to switch hats for a moment. I was a former mayor of a northern British Columbia city. Most cities face policing costs as one of the biggest budgetary items. I just want to show a comparison of policing costs, and I will use British Columbia as an example. First example, RCMP police communities. Communities with populations under 5,000, the province paid 70% of the cost, and the federal government paid 30%. Communities between 5,000 and 15,000, the municipalities pays the 70%, and the federal government still pays the 30%. Communities with populations of over 15,000, the municipality now pays 90%, and the government pays 10%. Second example, a comparison done several years ago showed that municipal union police forces in 12 communities in BC had 2,262 police officers looking after roughly 1.2 million people at a cost of $348 million. RCMP contract services in BC at the same time in 28 communities having a population of over 15,000 had 2,692 policemen looking after 2,109,000 people for a cost of $369,652, or, Mr. Speaker, $22 million more for doing twice the work. In my opinion, if the RCMP is unionized, the costs to communities across Canada that are contracted to RCMP being policed will increase dramatically. Our Conservative Party, as do I, respect the Supreme Court's decision that the RCMP officers are entitled to bargain collectively. However, I cannot support any legislation that denies employees, especially RCMP members, the right to vote in a secret ballot on whether to unionize. The Court's first and fundamental tenet of the Charter right is employees' choice, and that is not reflected in this bill. Mr. Speaker, we do not use a show of hands or a public petition in our democratic elections, nor should we be in the workplace. RCMP members risk their lives every day. The least we can do is give them the democratic right to vote, free of all intimidation on whether to unionize. We support this legislation going to committee, where we will be asking the government to amend its legislation to explicitly allow RCMP members the right to vote on whether to unionize through a secret ballot. The RCMP collective rights under Section 2B of the Charter can be exercised by their employee choice at the first instance, saying whether they want an association or not, and that vote to be conducted in a way that conforms with our democratic principles should be by secret ballot. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-7 would bring certain parts of the workplace relationship outside of the bill, certain elements through the grievance process, and certain elements of the workplace would not be subject to the collective bargaining relationship. This is important due to the unique role and chain of command structure inherited to the RCMP as a police force. Mr. Speaker, I urge the Minister to work alongside the Commissioner of the RCMP to ensure the bargaining and the well-being of our people in safeguarding the employees' wellness in uniform and afterwards. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to once again remind my colleagues the RCMP members risk their lives every day. The least we can do is give them the democratic right to vote free of all intimidation on whether to unionize. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Yellowhead for his remarks and also for his service on behalf of Canada. I would like to point out to the member that the Public Sector Labour Relations Act has a number of sections that prohibit intimidation, and so I agree with him that this must be a situation that's free of intimidation of the RCMP members, and that is by law required in Section 186.1 of the Act, Section 187, Section 188, and Section 189. So it covers that there may not be intimidation from the employer or from the union or for any person. So I would ask the member, when this law will, once C4 is passed, this law will allow the board to select the appropriate method, whether it be card check or mandatory vote or secret ballot. Why would the member require a one-size-fits-all approach that would not be suitable for all situations, rather than give the board the flexibility to put forward the method that makes sense in the situation?
Well, member for Yellowhead.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't quite get that whole question, but I'm going to answer it the best way I think I can. There is not a unanimous agreement within the RCMP as to becoming unionized. There is a group within the organization that wants to go that way. There's a group within the organization that want to remain in the basic way it is today. The DSSR system was a great negotiating tool for the RCMP. It worked extremely well until government started to intervene with that democratic process of enabling the DSSR reps to represent the members in the field in the appropriate ways. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for North Okanagan-Shuswap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my seatmate here on his excellent speech today, and congratulate him on and thank him on behalf of the residents of Canada for his years of service in the RCMP. To serve that many years, this great country, I owe you a great deal of respect. I'd like to just ask the member if he can explain in his words why this this vote should be done by secret ballot. We've heard recently other comments from other members of how their parents were actually intimidated by the card showing process, and why this should actually be done through a secret ballot.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
I'd like to thank my honourable member for that question, and thank you. I'm honoured to serve for that time, and I'm honoured to serve right now, and I'll keep serving. I'm going to try to make 50 years. I'll see if I can do it. Anyways, there is a dissension within the RCMP, and I hate to see it. It breaks my heart. There's two fractions in there. One that want to unionize because they think that they can make things a lot better for themselves and force the hand of the management of the RCMP. There was a DSSR program that I feel at one time worked extremely well. It was kind of an envy of a lot of police forces because government paid RCMP members to represent us. We voted for those people. They represented us. They argued for us. They worked on discipline matters. They worked on internal matters. They worked on promotional matters. And they worked very effectively at one time on our pay. And when they were very effective and when government listened to them, we were at the top level of Canadian police forces. We didn't say we had to be at the number one. We just wanted to be at the top and be fair. Things have gone downhill drastically. So I support this bill if it's going to help my members in the field, because I believe I don't want to see an organization that I was so proud to serve for 35 years stay at the bottom. I want it up there and my members to be happy, and when they're happy, they're going to serve their communities in a much better way than they are today. Thank you.
Reprise du débat. Resuming debate. The honourable member for Foothills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It really truly is an honor to follow up my respected colleague from Yellowhead, and I would also like to share the comments that a lot of respect for him for the 35 years that he served with the RCMP and protected the communities of Canada. And we are truly blessed to have him as a member of our caucus and a member of this government. Thank you. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about some of the history. I'm very blessed to have a deep RCMP and Northwest Mounted Police history in my riding. We have Fort Macleod, which was founded in 1874. It is now a world-renowned museum of the Northwest Mounted Police in Western Canada. Downtown Fort Macleod is now a provincial historic site, as well as the museum. And we also have the Alberta Provincial Police Building in Crow's Nest Pass, which was founded in 1918. Proud to say that our Conservative government last year contributed $100,000 to the refurbishing of that police building to protect its history. And I'm sure many people in this House would like to know that Corporal Stephen Lawson was killed in front of that building in the early 1900s. And one of the accomplices in the shooting was a Florence Lysandro, who was convicted of that murder and was the first and only woman ever hanged in Alberta's history. So there's a little bit of our history in Alberta as well. But today I want to speak about Bill C-7 and how disappointed I am on this side of the House, I think many of us are, that we continue to have to challenge this Liberal government on the importance of accountability and transparency when it comes to unions, and specifically the importance of a secret ballot. Our RCMP members are out there each and every day protecting our rights and our freedoms and the importance of democracy. So I'm asking the members of this House, why would we miss this opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with the RCMP, stand up and protect their democratic rights when we have the chance to do so? And it's disappointing to see that we are missing this opportunity by putting forward Bill C-7, which does not include the rights to a secret ballot. I'm asking this Liberal government to send this bill back to committee in order that we can add the provision of the importance of a secret ballot for RCMP when they are faced with the question to certify or not certify as a union. Simply put, I think that is the right thing to do. Members of the RCMP have the democratic right to a free and a fair secret ballot when they are certifying or decertifying as a union. Every single one of us in this House was elected by way of a secret ballot. Every single member of a provincial or municipal government was elected by way of a secret ballot. And I think that only makes sense that we would be sharing that democratic right, not a privilege, a democratic right to a secret ballot at all levels, including unions. A secret ballot is the cornerstone of our democracy. It is at the heart of our Canadian values. But the Liberal government has shown again with the combination of Bill C-7 and Bill C-4 that they see the right as a secret ballot as being somehow obsolete. And we've heard in many cases, they don't feel that it's democratic at all, which I find to be extremely disappointing and concerning. Mr. Speaker, this is about balance and creating a fair environment in which workers are the ones who are making the choice that they feel is best suited to their needs. The Supreme Court decision speaks to allowing the RCMP the right to associate for the purposes of collective bargaining, and I think all of us in this House agree and support that decision. However, we also believe that this is an opportunity to vote by the way of a secret ballot, and it should be a right, or it should be a privilege and a democratic right that the RCMP have the opportunity. Our specific intent has always been to preserve the democratic rights of Canadian workers through increasing public confidence in unions. But to have that confidence, union must operate in a transparent and accountable way without any chance of undue influence or coercion. Our democratic system was designed with a secret ballot as its keystone, specifically to maintain the integrity of the vote and to allow citizens to cast their ballot in privacy. Now, our Jobs Minister has made it very clear that she does not believe in the integrity of a secret ballot. In fact, she has said that the card check system is a much more democratic way to certify or decertify a union. Recently in committee meetings, she was asked why would she repeal C-525, which gave employees a democratic right to a secret ballot to decertify or certify a union. And I want to have this quote here. Her answer was very clear on where she stands and where this Liberal government stands on terms of democracy. And I quote, "The card check system is a perfectly democratic way of measuring support that assures absolute majority of employees support the union, not just those who came out to vote." End quote. So our Jobs Minister is saying in committee that a card check system is a much more democratic way to decide if a majority of people support whatever that issue is over a secret ballot. That somehow when people actually show up to vote for something, they are not legitimate. I would like to ask everybody in this House, when I went around door knocking, and I know all of you, most of you did as well, when I go around door knocking in my riding as we go through the election period, if I go up to ask that person, I want your vote right now, I want you to sign this piece of paper, and that's going to tell that you vote for me while I am standing there. How often do you feel that person is going to be telling you the truth? Is going to be, are you telling me to wrap it up? Is that, that's okay.
I've given you a signal that not to speak through the speaker, but not directly to it. Thank you.
How often do you think that those residents would be telling the person who's at the front door the truth? How often do you feel, or would we feel here, that when you're having a card check system vote and you're asking people in a union shop, for example, that we want you to raise your hand, and that's going to be, well, everyone else is standing there looking at you. How is that fair? How is that democratic? When you compare that to the opportunity to a secret ballot where you have with your own conscience that you know that person knows that they're making a decision that they feel is right for them with no coercion, no intimidation, and no one influencing your decision. And I know on that fact, you know, after an election, when those of us here in this House, Mr. Speaker, and we go and speak to our residents, and we've all had that discussion at the coffee table or the dinner table, you know, who are you going to vote for tomorrow, or who are they going to vote for tomorrow? No one wants to tell you, or they're very reluctant to tell you. That's something very private, something that we need to hold to ourselves, and we should respect that decision, and we should respect the foundation, the importance of that secret ballot. And I've heard that story over and over again from people and residents that, you know, Canadians expect privacy when they are casting their ballot, and I think that's something that we should embrace. Voting is a very personal action. People cherish the privacy of marking their ballot and the secret without intimidation of influence or coercion. And why would we make that same right, the same basic right for the men and women who put their lives on the line every single day and when they put their uniform to go to work? And what could be possibly easier and more straightforward than a secret ballot? There's really absolutely nothing more simple. One person, one vote. And that's how it should be. Open, transparent results ensure confidence and a true decision was made, whether you are certifying a union or decertifying a union. The Liberal Party campaigned on accountability and transparency, and by keeping secret ballots out of this legislation, it again is obvious that they have no intentions of keeping those election promises. Accountability and transparency seems to have gone the way of commitments to a $10 billion deficit, balanced budgets, and dinosaurs. That seems to be all in the same viewpoint. Election promises broken time and time again. At the federal level, the previous Conservative government introduced extensive reforms to ensure Canadians have trust in their political institutions, and that included legislation like Bill C-525, which ensured union members would have the right to a secret ballot. And this legislation recognized the right to peaceful association, one that extends to all workers in Canada, should they wish to have a union represent them or not, and that is a right that should be passed on to the RCMP as well, if they choose to form a union. This choice is theirs to make, and theirs alone. The previous card check system for federally regulated industries required 50% plus one to sign a union membership card. It was very clear, despite what my colleague on the other side of the floor would like to say, this is open to abuse. It has been open to abuse, and certainly there are many stories where employees have been pressured to sign a union card against their will. And I know she rattled off all these different laws that were in place, but just because a law is written down, I'm certain all of us can agree that that doesn't mean it's followed. And I'm sure we all understand that there are many opportunities where card check systems in place definitely open the door to intimidation and coercion. But really, to wrap it up, Mr. Speaker, the message I want to get here is very clear. The RCMP, each and every day, they put their lives on the line to protect our rights, our freedoms, and our democracy. We have one chance here. We're at the root opportunity here in dealing with collective bargaining with the RCMP. This is our opportunity for us here to stand up with our RCMP and stand up to protect their rights and their democratic rights, and they will not do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mount Royal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the honourable member for Yellowhead for his service in the RCMP and protecting Canadians for, I believe, 32 years. Very impressive. I appreciate the comments of the honourable member, and I appreciate the fact that at the committee there certainly has to be serious discussion about a secret ballot versus the card system. I think it's a subject of very legitimate debate. But I wanted to ask the honourable member a different question. The NDP has voiced concern about some of the limitations that are set out in the law with respect to some of the areas that the collective bargaining negotiations cannot touch, such as harassment. I wanted to know what the Conservative position was on those limitations and if they agreed with the limitations in the current bill.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his question. I think we've been very clear. We agree with, we do support the outline of Bill C-7. But what we are really trying to say is we are encouraging the Liberal government to take this back to committee, have a fulsome discussion on the merits of a secret ballot over the card check system. So I'm very relieved to hear from a member of the Liberal government that they are willing to have that discussion. So I hope he is going to follow through on that commitment to have a legitimate discussion on why we should have a secret ballot over the card check system. And I think most of us on this side would support C-7 if that was part of the discussion.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député d'Hochelaga.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member for Foothills talked a lot about fairness, to quote him, and he talked about it only in the context of a secret vote. What about someone who's out on the field, who knows the situation on a day-to-day basis? Wouldn't it be fair for them to have an opportunity to negotiate all of their working conditions, including conditions for deployment or surrounding harassment? Would that not be the situation? The honourable member.
I'm sorry.
No. If he wants to add.
The honourable member for Foothills, please go ahead.
That's okay, Mr. Speaker. Now, I missed the beginning of her question. I believe she said somebody in the field. Would they have the same opportunities? Absolutely, but that's part of a collective bargaining. As you'll have the opportunity to discuss various issues between yourself and your union. But the question that we're having first, before we get to that point, is whether you want to certify or decertify as a union, whether you even want to be in a union. And I think the keystone of that is the opportunity to have a secret ballot to make that decision. But those other issues will be certainly discussed as part of the collective bargaining agreement. But first, you can't go to that until you have trust that the decision you've made to even form a union in the first place is legitimate, and the majority of the members want to be in that union.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his wonderful talk. If you just Google RCMP intimidation, you come up with harassment claims, RCMP culture of bullying, harassment, inside RCMP's biggest crisis. I'd like to ask my colleague, considering there's all these issues outstanding with RCMP intimidation and harassment, somehow the member across the floor seems to think there will not be similar issues with a card system just by waving around a memo from the government. Do you believe the intimidation and harassment that seems to be so endemic with the force right now will magically disappear with a wave of a memo, or is it better served by a secret ballot?
Honourable member for Foothills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my colleague, and he brings up a good point. I think we're fooling ourselves if we believe that there's never been any influence or coercion or strong-arming of members of a business or a company when it comes to forming a union. And I think what we really need to focus on here is ensuring that RCMP don't just have the right, but it is or don't have a privilege, but it is their right to have a democratic secret ballot. So if a secret ballot is part of this legislation, we will not have to worry about harassment and coercion and influence, undue influence on making that decision, because we will have the secret ballot as part of that decision-making process. And I think that is absolutely key to ensure, again, that if they do want to go to a union, that a decision that they make, and they themselves make on whatever their conscience tells them is best for them.
Right on.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this debate. I'll be splitting my time with the member for Caribou Prince George. And just on a slightly different vein, I want to say I know this has been a tough week for many of us here. I want to express my own personal condolences to the Hillier and Ford family, and also express my best wishes to the member of Scarborough-Agincourt. I understand there's some health issues now that have reemerged. I've really enjoyed debating with him in this House thus far, and I look forward to him having a full recovery and continuing to contribute to this place. Mr. Speaker, this Bill C7 is about the RCMP. It's about collective bargaining in the context of the RCMP. And I want to just, before I get into some substantive arguments about the specific issue of secret ballots, which is, I know, been sort of the focus of the back and forth and the focus of the disagreement, I want to just kind of review some of the ground in terms of our perspective on this bill. Our bill acknowledges and respects a recent Supreme Court decision which says that the RCMP are entitled to bargain collectively. And we also think that for the most part, C7 is a fairly reasonable response to the court ruling. And we do support this legislation going through to committee. Though that's sort of the basic underlying groundwork here. However, we feel very strongly that this legislation needs to protect the right of RCMP members to vote in terms of unionization, to vote via a secret ballot. That's an important right. It's respected for Canadians in the vast majority of contexts. We think that working men and women in the RCMP and in other environments need to have their right to vote in a secret ballot respected. Now, notably as well, wage disputes will continue to be resolved through binding arbitration. There will be no striking of police officers, obviously. That's pretty obvious, but it's, I think, an important point to clarify. Now, in the context of discussing the RCMP, I do want to just briefly salute the very good work done in my own constituency by the RCMP. My riding of Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, we don't have municipal, and certainly in Alberta, we don't have provincial police forces, so we're served directly by the RCMP. And we greatly appreciate the incredible work that the RCMP does in terms of direct policing, but also in terms of a very positive engagement with the community. I know in some of the past work I've done with different not-for-profit organizations, it's been great to have the engagement of the RCMP with different not-for-profits. For example, I was involved with the Rotary Club of Sherwood Park. We would regularly have members of the RCMP come and update us on some of the issues and challenges in our community, and we had a really positive working relationship that was facilitated by that connection. Now, because of the immense respect that we on this side of the House, and I think all members have for members of the RCMP, we think it is important that this legislation protect their right to make decisions about collective bargaining through a secret ballot. Now, we're at less than 10 government bills so far, and 2 of them deal with union certification, and neither of them protect a right to see a secret ballot. In fact, one of them that we've already debated in this place explicitly eliminated the protection of the right to secret ballot. So it's clear how this government sees the issue of the secret ballot. And I've said before in this House that this is really an issue that I would have thought would have been resolved. We're kind of rehaving this 19th century debate about why secret ballots are actually important. Again, something that I think many people would have thought was settled. But I think it's important to identify why a secret ballot is important. And I want to identify what I see as 4 key motivating arguments for the secret ballot. Secret ballots protect a right to privacy. They ensure protection against reprisals. They ensure protection against corruption. And they facilitate a necessary process of deliberation that allows voters to most effectively express what is in their own interests. So first of all, this issue of a right to privacy. Now, a public ballot does not respect an individual's right to privacy. It requires an individual to write or declare publicly their political convictions. And there was a time when this is how elections happened, when people had to declare publicly who they were voting for, and there were all kinds of problems with that. But one of them is that their basic right to have their privacy protected in terms of their deeply held political convictions was not respected. And the reason I think we would see the importance of a right to privacy in this context is that a person's opinions are in a meaningful way their own property. My opinions are my opinions, not just in the sense that I hold them, but that they are mine to dispose of, to share or not to share as I would wish. And laws, systems of administration or certification that do not allow an individual to, in fact, keep their opinions to themselves or dispose of them as they wish is a violation of their privacy. It is in a sense, a violation of their ownership of their own opinions. But it also has negative practical consequences as well. In addition to violating the basic privacy rights of, in this case, members of the RCMP, not having a secret ballot, having a public ballot, always creates the risk of possible reprisal. And this is very much the early history of the movement to the secret ballot. Secret ballots were introduced in the 19th century in the UK, for example, around the time of the Great Reform Acts. And as the franchise was extended, as more people were being allowed to vote, there was a recognition that especially those who were more economically disadvantaged and therefore dependent on the employ of those who were wealthier than them, that they were vulnerable to political pressure and reprisals in the context of a public ballot. So the history ballot was, the secret ballot was very much brought in to protect the rights of people, of working men and women, to be able to express themselves politically without fear of reprisal. So it's perverse, it's ironic, it's quite unfortunate that it's precisely in the environment of union certification, where we're talking again about the basic political rights of working men and women, that the government is clearly not respecting the importance of the secret ballot. There is, of course, always the possibility that in a public ballot, someone would face some kind of a reprisal, a negative social or other response from colleagues if they weren't doing or voting in a certain way that was what this other person wished them to do. Now, the third argument in favor of the secret ballot is that it provides, thank you, Mr. Speaker, it provides protection against corruption. Before there were secret ballots, there was the real risk of people being paid to vote a certain way. And that's a possibility when you have a public ballot. That's obviously not a possibility when there is a secret ballot, because there is no way to effectively buy a vote, because you don't know then if the vote is actually provided as it was paid. So that's another argument that was important in the initial evolution of the secret ballot, and to some extent remains important now, that there is no possibility of there being inducements when there is a secret ballot. Now, finally, secret ballots ensure that there is a process of deliberation that happens before a vote. So a vote date is set. There is an opportunity for both sides of an argument to present their opinions, for there to be a conversation, and then for a conclusion to arise. I think most people accept the importance of this process of deliberation. That's why we have an election campaign. That's why we have a period of debate before an election takes place. Now, the advantages of this for working men and women in the context of certification are very clear. Someone might come up to me and say, why don't you sign this card and present me one side of the arguments? And I might say, sure, that sounds like a good idea. But I might feel differently if I was presented with counter-arguments. And having that process of deliberation ensures that people have time to think through and act according to their interests. So these are, I think, some key reasons why a secret ballot is important in this context and in all contexts. Now, the principal arguments we hear against the secret ballot, specifically in the context of certification. People say on the other side that, well, a secret ballot remains an option here, it's just not required. Well, all these arguments about the importance of a secret ballot, I think, indicate why a secret ballot should be guaranteed. People should have the certainty of knowing that their privacy will be protected. Now, if you said that, well, in the next general election, there will be secret ballots in some ridings but not in others, I think we would say that that was insufficient, that there should be a guarantee of respect for individuals' privacy when they cast their ballot. Now, certainly this issue of employer intimidation, the possibility of employer intimidation and an imbalance in the workplace is raised from time to time. Certainly, though, there is no serious possibility of intimidation against an individual voter who keeps their perspectives quiet and votes in a secret ballot. Now, there's always the risk of intimidation against organizers of a certification drive, and I would acknowledge that. But of course, the possibility of intimidation in that case exists regardless of whether or not there's a secret ballot, because somebody who is organizing, whether it's in the context of a card check or in the context of a secret ballot, there still is the possibility of intimidation there. Further, we're dealing with the government here. The likelihood of the government exerting employer type intimidation is very unlikely. So for these reasons, we see the value of this bill and we support it going to the committee, but we hope the government will see the value as well of the secret ballot. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his thoughtful comments. And indeed, this bill, if it should go to committee, will be examining all of these issues in great detail, and our government is open to those discussions and hearing from the witnesses, as we discussed in the debate yesterday, that this can be thoroughly canvassed at committee. The member talked about legitimacy of a process of certification. Our government is absolutely committed to supporting the dedicated members of the RCMP, and so that's what this bill is about. With respect to certification, there is a board that is responsible for the democratic process, is legitimacy. If they have any concerns about any method, they can then apply a secret ballot. They can, so they have that responsibility. So secret ballot has its pros and cons, as the member mentioned. So does card check, as the member mentioned. The board has the power and responsibility to ensure a proper democratic process. Why would the member argue for a one-size-fits-all approach when clearly that's not necessary, and we have a board that has options to have the best approach for the situation?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her comments. Clearly, there are certainly areas of agreement when it comes to this bill. I would disagree, though. She says there are pros and cons to secret ballots. I haven't heard any cons to secret ballots. I mean, this is the system we use for democratic elections everywhere in every other context. Now, she says that there is a board that will make these determinations, and I think I alluded to this in my speech, that the counter-argument from the other side is, well, there's always the option of a secret ballot. There could be or there could not be a secret ballot, up to the discretion of the board in this case. Now, with great respect for them, I will just say, though, that protecting people's rights should mean a guarantee that their rights will be respected. It should be a guarantee that, for instance, their right to privacy will be respected. And I think it's very clear that protecting someone's right to privacy is right in every case. That doesn't mean that we should use the pejorative one-size-fits-all solution type description. I think let's just say that everybody has the same right to have their privacy respected in all contexts, which means that RCMP officers, that all Canadians, working men and women, should have a guarantee that they will have a secret ballot, that they will be able to express their opinions privately if they wish.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Regina Leuven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, for his eloquent remarks. He is a fellow new MP and, of course, was not part of the previous Conservative government. But he has often come forward in this House as an ardent defender of that government's record. So my question is, if the Conservative position is really to support collective bargaining rights for members of the RCMP subject to a secret ballot certification process, why did the previous Conservative government not extend collective bargaining rights to members of the RCMP when the Canada Labour Code at that time did include a secret ballot certification process? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and especially as we're in budget week, I am reminded of, yes, the fact that I am a very ardent defender of the record of our government when it comes to budget policy and other areas. But specifically with respect to the member's question, you know, I think there is perhaps some debate about the kind of process that should exist when it comes to collective bargaining in the RCMP. But what we've said very clearly in this House here is that now we have a Supreme Court decision. So it's the responsibility of the government to respond to and implement that Supreme Court decision, and that's what C7 does. And so it is important now that, yes, we have legislation that responds to that, but legislation that does it in the right way. And we've made the argument about the importance of the secret ballot. I know that this member and I have debated the secret ballot point before. We feel very strongly, I know the NDP and the Liberals disagree, that working men and women should have their right to a secret ballot respected in all cases.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure today to rise in the House and to debate Bill C7. I do want to start with thanking our RCMP members in my riding at Caribou, Prince George, as well as my honourable colleague from Yellowhead for his 35 years of service. Mr. Speaker, I would like you to know as well, too, and it to be on record, that I was an RCMP brat. My stepfather served in the RCMP, and which meant that I saw many of the communities and small communities from tip to tail in British Columbia. Our RCMP are our moms, dads, sisters, brothers. They're volunteers in their communities. They coach minor sports. They work with charities. They contribute to the health and wellness of our communities, not just when they have the uniform on, but every day. The men and women of the force put their uniforms on and they go to work every day knowing full well that they'll experience human tragedy, and that they know full well that their lives may be placed in danger just so you and I and our families can sleep well at night. They are our silent sentinels. The RCMP, the legend of the Mountie, is well known. Always getting their man, Dudley Do-Right, and my favorite superhero, Captain Canuck, who by day is a mild-mannered RCMP, and by night he is fighting evildoers. The red serge and the campaign hat are representatives of our proud country. Core values of integrity, honesty, professionalism, respect, and accountability are what our members of our force back in 1873, the 150 first recruits, and now the 28,461 members strong carry. As I said earlier, my stepfather was an RCMP. And he told me long ago that it was not because of the great wage of that time, but it was because of the proud and the respect of the force. It is internationally recognized. The musical ride. I too have traveled with Mounties from coast to coast and overseas as well in my travels in representing Canada. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the lineups to get the photos with the Mounties are always the longest at every event. But today our forces, all 2,800 and 461 of them, are at capacity. There's a 30% disparity with their unionized counterparts. They are facing increasingly challenging times. An average citizen may expect or experience 1 to 2 traumatic events in their lifetime, whereas an officer, a police officer, may experience up to 600 to 900 traumatic events over the course of their career. A recent study shows that over the course of a 20-year career, as I said, over 900 traumatic incidents our RCMP members will face, our police forces will face. Over 30% of our police force are suffering from PTSD. Mr. Speaker, we need to break the stigma. We need to give confidence that our men and women can come forward and report issues, whether it's harassment, whether it's PTSD. We need to give confidence that they can ask for help. And, Mr. Speaker, we need to give the organization and the management, the families, the resources for training so that we don't unnecessarily lose another life. Mr. Speaker, we're here to talk about Bill C7. And about a secret ballot, about allowing those that put their lives in danger every day the democratic right for a secret ballot without fear of intimidation or reprisal. Regardless of what policy reads, Labour policy reads, as my honourable colleague from across the way have said, fear and intimidation happen. Whether it's in our RCMP force, our police forces, our firefighters, our regular everyday work forces, fear and intimidation of some sort does happen. Harassment and intimidation takes place. Mr. Speaker, our Conservative stance is that we support the Supreme Court decision, and we stand with our men and women on the front line. But we believe those who risk their lives every day deserve the democratic right to vote free of intimidation and reprisal. Mr. Speaker, over the last couple of days, I've been accused of being against unions and against our frontline members, and this couldn't be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. Over my time, I belonged to 5 unions, and I believe that they have a right in today's work environment. And I also believe that my Bill C-211 that calls for a national framework to deal with PTSD for our first responders, our RCMP members, our veterans, our corrections officers, our firefighters, speaks for itself and speaks for my belief and my stance for those that put their lives in danger every day. Mr. Speaker, communities in my riding are facing increased costs associated with policing. They're struggling to be able to appropriately fund our police forces. Whether it's overtime due to illness, injury, or lack of resources, meaning members and bodies, we are struggling. Just in my community of Williams Lake, to the south of Prince George, we have an ongoing issue with gang violence. Just last night, I was meeting with the Minister Goodale on this issue. Just one tactic of combating this issue that we have, asking for 3 additional members. That means an increased tax hike of 2% on an economy that is already stressed. On an economy, on a mayor, on a council, on a town that is facing challenging times already as it is, but one that is gripped in fear of the increasingly violent activities of these gangs. Mr. Speaker, we need to give the resources for our police forces, for our frontline members, for our management. We need to be able to give them the opportunity to vote free of fear, of reprisal. Amending Bill 7 to allow for the democratic right to a vote is the right thing to do. Consulting with municipalities who ultimately bear the costs of policing so that the resources necessary to fulfill the agreements that ultimately either being unionized or being negotiated are in place is the responsible thing to do. Giving the resources for our communities, giving the resources for our management and our police force is the right thing to do. But we face challenging times, Mr. Speaker. We have a government that doesn't believe that giving a democratic vote or giving a voice to those who put their lives in danger is the right thing to do. So I will not be supporting this bill. But I do hope that it can get to committee so that this government can do the right thing. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was very disappointed to hear that the member from Caribou Prince George has already made up his mind and determined that he will not support Bill C-7 when it has not even been at committee to be reviewed. So I think that's very surprising, considering his very eloquent remarks in terms of the rich tapestry and history of the RCMP and his deep regard for the forces. Our government is respecting the Supreme Court ruling that respects the right to be represented in bargaining by members and reservists of the RCMP, and that's exactly what this bill is all about. The members' concerns are actually about another bill, which is C-4, which rolls back changes that were made without any consultation in Bill C-525 that would force one single, one-size-fits-all bargaining system on the Public Service Labor Relations Board. Now, why would the member want that when what he is wanting a vote free of reprisal? It's exactly what the purpose of the board is. They have the tools to ensure that. They have options for how to implement a vote. They have laws that support the freedom from any intimidation. They have penalties and orders that they can impose. They review a vote, whether it's done by card check or mandatory vote or secret ballot. Why would the minister want a the member want a one-size-fits-all approach and prejudge this very important legislation and be prepared to vote against a legislation that is all about respecting the members of the RCMP?
The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, we trust our men and women of the RCMP to make life and death decisions every day. We trust that through their training and that their courage, that they will run towards danger when others run in opposite directions. So, Mr. Speaker, I have a hard time understanding why we would not trust that they are capable of making or having a secret ballot vote and voting in favor or against a union.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Yellowhead. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I was in the wrong seat. I'm honourable friend from Prince George. In your travels throughout your riding, and I noticed you mentioned Williams Lake, and that was my first posting, and it was a busy community back.
I just want to remind the honourable member. To place his questions through the chair, not directly to the other members. Thank you.
Okay. To the member from Prince George, I apologize, Mr. Speaker. A little motion there, and I wanted to get back to it. But anyways, in your travels throughout your riding, you have a number of large communities in the Prince George area. And have you spoken with community leaders in those areas, and are they concerned of the impact of the RCMP unionizing as to the physical costs that they will be impacted upon?
Honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you to my honourable colleague from Yellowhead. I have met with our mayors and council and our regional leaders as late as Saturday of last week. And not speaking specifically to unionization, but speaking specifically to the rising costs and concerns of policing and being able to adequately staff. I have spoke with RCMP leadership as well as frontline staff, and that are taxed at capacity and are concerned. Mr. Speaker, we have a duty. The folks in this House have a duty to allow people to freedom of choice for their workplace environment. The democratic right to vote by secret ballot is inherent, and we should be accepting of that and respecting that. There are 28,461 members, and allowing a single board to make the decision for all of them is unacceptable.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to rise here today to discuss Bill C-7, which would give RCMP members, at long last, the right to collective bargaining. Many speakers before me have talked how the RCMP is an important and even iconic police force, underlying how critical this discussion is. As a member from British Columbia, I am grateful for the dedicated work of the RCMP in protecting citizens across most of our province and indeed across the country. Over the past months, I have met with members from RCMP detachments from across my riding to discuss local issues and this issue of collective bargaining. I also recently attended a public information meeting organized by the RCMP in Oliver, BC, to discuss public safety, and I was impressed by the respectful and meaningful discussions that community members had with local RCMP members. We need to retain and nurture that mutual respect between the community and the RCMP. And I heard the member from Yellowhead here just now lament that the RCMP had slipped in its rankings across the country, and we'd all like to see that ranking improve. And while I thank him for that service and respect his thoughts on collective bargaining, I think that Bill C-7 will be a step in the right direction for that new and better future for the RCMP. So I'm pleased to support this bill at second reading, a bill that gives RCMP members the same rights enjoyed by all other police forces in Canada. As we've heard, this bill is the government response to a Supreme Court ruling that struck down laws that have prohibited RCMP members from bargaining collectively. And given the court-imposed deadline, the NDP will support this bill, but we're looking for some important amendments in committee. The Mounted Police Professional Association of Canada advocates for workplace issues on behalf of its members, and in a recent press release, that association states that this bill is flawed by removing vital matters from the bargaining table, such as disciplinary measures and allocation of resources. Mr. Speaker, it's critical that the new collective bargaining regime that RCMP members will work under will include more than the ability to negotiate pay and benefits. Workplace safety, staffing, harassment, and discipline issues are often more important for a properly functioning organization than pay alone. I'm reminded of the decade-long dispute between the British Columbia government and the BC Teachers Federation, which revolved primarily around class size issues. We've all heard numerous reports of harassment in the RCMP workplaces over the past number of years. I cannot see how excluding procedures to deal with harassment in collective bargaining will improve the workplace conditions experienced by RCMP members. These are very serious situations and must be dealt with promptly and fairly, and the procedure for doing that would be best created under a collective bargaining system. While for most of my life I've lived in areas where the RCMP provides public safety services, I have lived in Vancouver and Newfoundland for considerable periods, and I can honestly say that the police forces there function very well under a collective bargaining regime. So I have to ask how submitting discipline procedures or concerns about workplace safety to a collective bargaining process would undermine the neutrality or stability of the RCMP. We were reminded how important workplace safety issues are only yesterday when a young man died on a workplace here in downtown Ottawa. And while policing safety issues are clearly different, they are nonetheless critical to the lives of RCMP members across the country, particularly in more rural areas where RCMP members often work alone. So why are staffing measures explicitly excluded from the collective bargaining system offered to the RCMP in this bill? Since collective bargaining agreements would go to arbitration if agreements can't be made directly, RCMP management should be able to make arguments to the arbitrator if they feel that demands by members would create situations that would undermine the reliability of the RCMP in any way. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court decision stated that limits on collective bargaining would be acceptable if they were reasonable and justified. But other police forces all include workplace safety and discipline issues in their collective bargaining agreements, so it's a mystery why they would not be acceptable and appropriate for collective bargaining within the RCMP. So to conclude, I would just reiterate my position that I support this bill, and I recognize that it was perhaps prepared hurriedly to meet the Supreme Court deadline of May 16th. So I hope that the government will consider important changes to this bill in committee, namely to ensure that issues of staffing, deployment, harassment, and discipline are included in the collective bargaining system for the RCMP created by this bill. And I'd like to finish by just wishing everybody here in this House a happy Easter and safe travels home to your families. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may if I could start off by just indicating just how fabulous all members of this House, I believe, would, in many of their comments, just talk about the importance of the RCMP and the institution that they represent, and we just commend them on everything that they do for Canadians as a whole, as no doubt a number actually have been following this debate. Having said that, it's important that we recognize it was the Supreme Court of Canada ruling that ultimately demonstrated that the right to organize was essential for our RCMP, and this legislation is responding to that. Some of the details within the legislation is in direct response to extensive canvassing of the membership, over 9,000 RCMP officers, from what I understand, and more, involved in a very tangible ways to try to develop good legislation. We look forward to it ultimately going to the committee stage, and we would invite opposition members, in fact all members of the House, to continue to share their thoughts at the committee stage, because one should never say never about trying to improve legislation. So I appreciate the comments, and just a general question if a member would like to add anything else to his speech.
Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
No, I don't think I need to add anything to that. I do sense a real, coming together within this House that people think that collective bargaining, not everyone, but I think most people who have debated this issue have come up with the idea that collective bargaining would be a good idea for the RCMP. The only differences I hear from the Conservative side, there's issues around, how votes would be held or card check systems. The NDP, of course, we are mostly concerned with the exclusions that this bill has in terms of things like workplace safety and discipline, staffing, and issues like that. So, again, I think we're pretty much all on the same page, and I hope that when we go to committee, we can work out these other differences.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I want to congratulate my honourable colleague on an excellent speech and frankly on the government for introducing legislation that is long overdue. The right to collectively bargain in Canada is a constitutional right. And frankly, I think it's been a disgrace that the Canadian government has actively attempted to frustrate this, particularly the previous Conservative government, that made it so difficult for our men and women in uniform who simply want to sit down with their employer and collectively bargain the terms and conditions. I want to point out to this House that I believe the RCMP is the only police force in the country that has been prohibited from unionizing and collective bargaining if they choose. And so I think this is a welcome step to have the RCMP be able to do this. But I want to just ask my friend if he could elaborate at all on these exclusions that are in the Liberal bill and whether he thinks that those exclusions are justified or necessary. In other words, why is it necessary to take certain matters off the table and not let those be part of the normal collective bargaining process?
The Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, as I think I mentioned in my speech, it's a mystery to me why these have been excluded. They are essential parts of most collective bargaining agreements across the country, even in all the other police forces. So why we would not have issues around harassment or workplace safety or staffing levels included in a collective bargaining agreement, I don't understand those exclusions. And as I said, if the collective bargaining goes to an arbitrator and RCMP management feels that we shouldn't be discussing these certain areas, that arbitrator can make a pitch to the arbitrator, make arguments, and that arbitrator can decide whether those issues are important. But I think it is just not justified at all to exclude them directly in the bill.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de Laurentides.
Member for Laurentides-Labelle.
For South and Okanagan, West Kootenay on his speech. It is a right of police forces across Canada to bargain collectively at their discretion, as the member noted. Bill C7 grants the right to RCMP members and addresses the January 6, 2015 Supreme Court ruling on RCMP labour relations. And if we do not get this bill through before the extended deadline of May 17th, the RCMP will become covered directly by the PSLRA. Mr. Speaker, other changes are always possible in the future, but I want to know if the member is satisfied that we have met our Supreme Court obligation and will in fact be improving the situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. I'm not a lawyer, certainly not at the Supreme Court level, so I don't want to make pronouncements as to whether this bill meets those needs or not. I assume it must at some level, because this bill has got through and has come to the House here. But I do think that in committee we have to discuss these issues that we in the NDP feel are lacking in this bill, namely the exclusions for the issues that I've mentioned previously.
Questions and comments? Seeing none, resuming debate. Seeing none. Is the House ready for the question? Oui. La question est la suivante.
The question is the following one. Mr. Bryson, seconded by Mr. Duclos, moves that Bill C7, an act to amend the Public Service Labor Relations Act, the Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board Act, and other acts, and to provide for certain other measures, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security.
Motion. On division? Very good. Accordingly, the bill stands deferred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security.
Second reading of this bill.
Okay, very good. The Honourable Whip, for the Government Whip.
Speaker, may I wish you and yours a joyous Easter, and to all members of the House. Mr. Speaker, I think if you would seek it, you would find consent to see the clock at 2:30.
Here. Do I have consent? We see the clock at 2:30. It being 2:30, pursuant to order made earlier today, the House stands adjourned until Monday, April 11th, 2016, at 11 a.m., pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1. Happy Easter to all of you. Happy Easter.